You're alive. It looked like a tray.
All right, welcome to Friday, January 31st, 2025, our budget retreat. I'm calling this meeting to order and giving notice that at this meeting, the council may vote to go into executive session just for consultation with the city's attorneys about anything that's on the agenda. Can we have roll call?
Mayor Daggett.
Here.
Vice Mayor Steve. Here. Aslan. Councilmember Garcia.
Here.
Member House.
Here.
Member Matthews.
Here.
Councilmember Spence.
Here.
Councilmember Aslan, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And Councilmember Spence, do you have our mission statement?
I would love to read it if someone has it.
Sorry to catch you off guard.
The mission of the city of Flagstaff is to protect and enhance the quality of life for all.
Thank you. And Councilmember House, would you read our land acknowledgement?
Sorry, Mayor, can you have someone else do it?
Ready to go.
You bet. Councilmember Garcia.
I thought I was ready to go. The Flagstaff City Council humbly acknowledges the ancestral lands of our area's indigenous nations and original stewards. These lands, still inhabited by native descendants, border mountains sacred to indigenous people. We honor them, their legacy, their traditions, and their continued contribution. We celebrate their past, present, and future generations who will forever know this place is home.
You.
Thank you.
Greg, please dazzle us.
Turning this over to Shannon, who's going to kick things off. We have a little bit of a rotation this morning.
Okay.
Shannon, could you remind the room about the microphones as well?
Yes.
Please, thank you.
So quick reminder, what we determined yesterday is if you're going to answer a question and you're coming from the back of the room, if you could come right up here behind Mayor and Vice Mayor Suite, you have to kind of be in line with this first set of doors for the microphone to pick you up. And then if you're going to come on the sides, right next to these tables, because if you get too far out of that perimeter, it doesn't necessarily pick you up so that the people online can hear you. So if you can do that for us, if you're coming up to the front of the room, that would be incredibly helpful. So good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Welcome to day 2, right? Day 2. If you are a wrestling fan, how many are wrestling fans? Okay. How many have seen the movie Unstoppable?
So I'm an ASU fan. That's why I've seen them.
Okay. Okay. Well, in the movie Unstoppable, it is about a gentleman who's born with one leg and he goes on to his love of wrestling. It's a very inspirational movie. So if you're looking for something good to watch, even if you're not an ASU fan, I would highly recommend it. It's a good movie to watch. So as we think about day 2, yesterday we talked about data. We talked about communication styles. We also discussed collaboration and trust and how important those are as we establish and communicate our city's priorities. Our fiscal health and our budget is no different. Those are super important to what we do as we establish our community priorities and we work on our recommended budget effort to adopt it. So today, we're going to talk a little bit about the budget team. It'll be an introduction as to what the budget team's role is. We're going to do an introduction to the city's budget, as well as talk about how we work together to maintain our fiscal health. We're going to discuss the council's role in the budget process. We have a very lovely, talented speaker who's going to join us today. Kathy, and Greg's going to tell you more about her later in the day. We're going to discuss priority-based budgeting. It's how we identify those things that we're going to fund in the budget and how they fall within those quartiles. And then the last thing we're going to talk about is, as staff, what we've identified as our focal points for this next year's fiscal budget. And we want to hear from council. We want to understand, what are those things that have been on your mind? What are those priorities that you think about as we're talking about next year's budget process? This is our first discussion where we'll start to understand what council would like to see. Really helps us in building that recommended budget. So that's what we have for today. I'm going to turn it over to Joanne. She's going to begin our budget team introduction.
Well, thank you, Shannon. I think everybody knows me. I'm Joanne Keene. I'm the Deputy City Manager for the city. Probably one of the newer members to the budget team. I joined the city, it'll be 2 years in May. I think I was the newest, and then we've had 2 members join. So what I'm going to do today is just kind of talk a little bit about the budget team. I think we'll go through the slides today, but it's different than the budget section that we'll be talking about. But the budget team is a team of leaders in the organization that really helps set our course for the organization. I wanted to go through, I was trying to think of a movie reference to talk about the budget team. It seems like we're talking about a lot of movies today. And I was thinking about Dodgeball. I wanted to, I think folks are in the room today, but if you're here, if you don't mind standing, we have Greg Clifton, our city manager. Greg's already standing. Sit down. Shannon Anderson, our deputy city manager. Myself, Joanne Keene. We have Rick Tatter, our management services director. Corey Vogt, our human resource. Andy Suda, our finance director. Heidi Derryberry, our assistant finance director. John Comer, our assistant budget manager. And I'd like to kind of go up to the 3 leadership team members. I left those kind of closer to the end. We have 3 members of the leadership team that sit on the budget team. And right now it's Nicole Antonopoulos, our sustainability director. Rebecca Sayers, who is our pros director. And Scott Overton, who's our public works director. And then we also have Seth Greger and Jared Witasek, who are our EAC reps on the budget team. So very comprehensive group for the city of Flagstaff. I did want to mention that the budget team does operate under a charter. So we do have a charter that kind of sets our membership, our meetings, kind of our course of the things that we cover. We do have the 3 members of the leadership team, and just recently, we've kind of moved to rotating those members out. So each leadership team member has a 3-year term, and they rotate. We actually stagger them, so we have every year. So Rebecca is the newest member who joined pretty recently, and she's been an awesome member of the budget team. Greg actually threw it out to the whole leadership team to say, hey, who's interested in this position? And it was pretty unanimous that Rebecca would be the one that would move on to the budget team. Nicole will be the next one to kind of move off the budget team. And again, we'll open it up to the leadership team and get some names. It is a lot of work. You know, some of the things that we cover. So the purpose of the budget team is that and again, this is in the charter. If you're interested in the charter, we'll send it out. But we provide financial advisement and strategic direction to the city organization and to protect the interest of the public through sound fiscal services. So some of the things that we do, we provide fiscal oversight and financial decision making, forecast short and long-term financial landscape. We're kind of constantly talking about those things within the meetings. We prepare the annual budget for city council's consideration. We provide recommendations to secure the organization's financial stability, and we address and respond to emergency needs and resource allocations. I think I just saw that Brandy actually just sent out the recession plan to, I know we'll talk a little bit about that more as well. As I did mention, this budget team, it is a lot of work, and we meet actually every week for a couple of hours every Thursday morning. So council, if you're ever trying to look for any of us, that's where we are. Pretty early on a Thursday morning, and items come to us pretty regularly. It's rare that we actually miss a budget team meeting. We also are part of council retreats, and you'll kind of see that the team today, have prepared information for council today. We also are part of the division review meetings, and I think that's 3 weeks. We sit with every department and go through their budget requests. And then we provide direction on recessionary and emergency response. Again, that kind of goes to what Brandy just sent out with our recession plan. So I'm going to turn it over to Greg, who's actually now going to talk about the roles of the budget team.
Thanks, Joanne. Thanks. Good morning, everybody. You're kind of getting the who and what and when on the budget team. I would echo comments already made. The team, it has a heavy lift. We meet weekly, and there are times of the year where we meet every day. That's coming up soon. And then throughout the year, as Joanne mentioned, we do these retreats. A lot of preparation goes into these retreats. So the budget team has really, and from what I have seen over the years, has really elevated to a very high and important role within organization. And we do have the charter that Joanne referenced. And we do engage in some strategic planning, a little bit more in the long term, but we deal with a lot of things in the short term as well. I want to mention, just to illustrate with the examples, and it's already been made, there's been reference made to this. It was the budget team a few years back, 5 years ago, maybe plus, that put together the strategic plan that I understand has now been circulated. Dr. Spence, you were asking about that yesterday. And at that time, going back to pre-COVID, I mean, the ink wasn't even dry on that policy, on that recession plan before we actually implemented that during a session that occurred when the outbreak of COVID was happening. It was a short recession. It was a recession. And I think, Rick helped me out on that. I think we went into the second phase of a 5-stage recession plan during that period. The third, thank you. So there you go, a good example of an administrative policy that has seen implementation to help us through the economic downturns that have happened. Similarly, throughout the global pandemic, this team, the budget team, wrestled a lot with what to do locally to better enable us to withstand the pressures of our local economy. Tourism, as you may recall, was plummeting at that time. In the earlier months of COVID, restaurants were closing. Businesses were closed downtown, and there were a lot of measures taken, not necessarily by the budget team, but the budget team was at the heart of a lot of this discussion, leading to the reentry plan that was subsequently formulated and put into place. Very important stuff when you think about how we budget during these times. And then more recently, and I think I heard Joanne made reference to this, with the catastrophic fires and resulting catastrophic floods that this community has endured. Out of that was a very important discussion at the budget team table to ultimately implement what is now our emergency management team. A few years back, it did not exist. Similar comments could be made with respect to our public affairs section. You heard Sarah speak yesterday on some topics. And the list goes on and on. The important takeaway is the strategic planning that goes into this, looking at the organization. Are we well equipped to meet the ongoing needs and changes and demands of our community, whether it be a global pandemic, recession, or response to local flooding? All of those things, of course, have very close budgetary impact. On a more ministerial level, the more day-to-day stuff, the budget team looks at the organizational expenditures as a whole. And we do so through the lens of priority-based budgeting. And you are going to get a wonderful introduction, refresher into priority-based budgeting shortly. And I do look forward to introducing our speaker. That we look at the methodologies, the programs, the services, and we make sure that these things are aligning with our community priorities, the priority-based budgeting. We also assess and review organizational revenues to assure that the resources are in place to properly address the needs, both, again, short-term and long-term operations. And we do that on a continuous basis, as mentioned. We're going to get a lot of updates today about where we are with revenues and projections and things like that. So we're starting high level here, a little bit big picture, and we'll narrow it down. And then in 2 weeks, when we retreat again, get more details and a little bit more into the weeds in this budget process that we're in, which, by the way, is really a year-round process. Heidi, I'll look to you for your affirmation here, but we have a little bit of a break during council recess in summer. But even during that time, like last year, I believe, we were doing the community survey to check on our community priorities. The point I'm trying to make here is it's a year-round process. It intensifies at this time of year, of course, but the budget team is pretty busy throughout the year. We provide oversight for the formulation of the annual city budgets that will culminate with council adoption in June or July. And then on an ongoing basis, we provide analyses of the budgetary matters that happen. Of course, there's no start and stop to budgetary needs. Many things occur mid-year after the budget's already been approved, and we do address those. So there are amendments to the budget that occur. There are intra-divisional transfers that occur. Personnel cost, we try. I mean, in the perfect world, if we could script it, all of those would be neatly bundled up at the time we're doing the budget, but it doesn't work that way. Things arise mid-year and we address them accordingly. Capital costs, same comment. Emergency expenditures, of course, you can't always forecast those, but we're much better equipped to do so these days. And then expenditures requiring approval pursuant to planning. And enough on the recession planning. Again, thank you for getting that document out to the council. So with that, I think I am turning this over to
Heidi and
Heidi
Rick.
and Rick. Great, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Greg. Good morning, Mayor, Council, Vice Mayor. My name is Heidi Derryberry. I am the city's Assistant Finance Director. I'm here this morning to talk to you briefly about an overall budget introduction. I know this slide is familiar to some, but I would like to walk through it quickly for those that are new. So as Greg mentioned, our budget process is all year. Even when council is kind of taking a break from it and leadership is taking a break from it, finance is nonstop on things. We're working on 5-year plans, updating revenue. So it really is an all year process. But today we're going to talk about starting with today's retreat. So this is kind of the official kickoff with council and the leadership. However, leadership has been working on budget already. They started in December, so they've been compiling their requests for personnel and for their operating needs, capital, all of those things. So even leadership and divisions have been working on budget since early December, end of November. So
That's the next kind of 3 slides. So along with council, we are currently working on employee input, section manager review, and division head review. So like I said, they're coming up with all their needs, their personnel needs. EAC is working on recommendations for compensation and HR. That's all happening right now. And actually today, all of the city's new requests are due. So everybody is actively working on getting all of those into PBB because those are due today. So after we get through that, finance will start to look at all those requests and pull them together, and that group's division review meetings, which you have heard about. This year with the timing, in 2 weeks, you get to hear from us again. So we will be back in 2 weeks to really kick off like the first retreat where we talk about numbers. So we'll be getting into what revenues are looking like, what our fixed costs are looking like, and really start diving into that. So on February 13th and 14th, that's what we're to talk about. And then right after that, the following Tuesday is when the budget team will start reviewing all of those requests. I think it's been mentioned a few times. We spend 3 weeks in this room going through every request that comes in, talking to all the divisions to understand their needs and what they are looking to have in the future, and make the decision. After those 3 weeks, we come with the manager's proposed budget. So we will make sure that all funds are balanced and all requests are balanced within the capacity that we have in each fund, whether it's ongoing or one time. And we do that all in the 3 weeks that we meet. And our next session with you guys is in April. So that's a 2-day retreat as well. And that is when you will see the proposed city manager budget. We will go through all the different details of that budget at the time. And then after that is when the official adoption starts. So the public hearing for property tax level adoption, if needed, if we decide to do an increase to that. In June is when we do that. We also do the adoption of the tentative budget, and then we do adoption of the final budget, and then the property tax levy adoption. And then after all that hard work, July 1st is when we do implementation of the next. But usually it's good for about a day before we start having budget conversations about new needs and things that have changed since. Timeline for this, as I mentioned, today is our first kickoff really retreat with council. We'll be back, as I said, on February 13th and 14th for our second council budget retreat. We will talk a little bit about that later today. March 27th, we have a council capital retreat. So a couple of years ago, we actually have a day retreat where we're just talking about capital. There's so much going on in the city, so many needs, so that we actually are dedicating a whole day. We used to make that part of the February or the April retreat, and it just kept growing and it just didn't fit anymore in that 2-day retreat. So we do have a designated retreat day for that. And then April 24th and 25th is when the city manager's recommended budget will be. And then, like I mentioned, June 2nd is the tentative budget adoption. The 17th is the property tax levy hearing, the first read of the property tax adoption, as well as the final budget adoption. And then July 1st is the final read. Now, again, I know many of you have seen the Color of Money presentation, but it's a good refresher for everyone, even if you have already heard this. But I would like to take a little bit of time to talk about what we at the city call color. The city has numerous funds and numerous types of revenue sources. We track all of these different sources in what we call funds, which is fund accounting. All governments are required to use fund accounting. We use this to segregate the different resources and different requirements or limitations on. And that is what we here at the city call our color of money. You do have a handout that you can reference for the color of money, which might be helpful. We will refer to this throughout the retreats you hear. Capital retreat, you'll see the little bags of money. Talk about those things, talk about capital projects and the restrictions on the funding and why we can't move money around. They're a good reference to this. So as I mentioned, the city has a number of revenue sources and many have restrictions on how they can be spent. We currently have over 50 different funds that we segregate those revenues and resources into, as well as expenses, to ensure we're complying with restrictions and accounting standards. In many instances, revenue from one fund cannot be used to pay for other fund expenses unless they meet the requirements of that funding. We here at the city have 5 different types of funds. We have the special revenue funds, enterprise funds, capital project funds, debt service funds, and last but not least, the general fund. So special revenue funds, these funds are used to account for revenues derived from specific taxes or other earmarked revenues. They are usually required by statute, charter provision, or ordinance to finance a particular function or a specific activity. We have many different special revenue funds, but some of our big ones, housing and community services. This fund includes our CDBG, Community Development Block Grant, any of the other housing related items. Most of this fund is funded with grants. However, there is a little bit of funding that comes in through the general fund. We have our library fund, which is funded by secondary property taxes as well as general fund transfers. The secondary property tax is adopted by the county and is then distributed to the city. And the general fund transfer is there to support these city libraries. Then we have HERF, or Highway User Revenue Fund. This is a gasoline tax, and this is a proportionate share of gasoline sales that we receive from the state.
On the library, say that part of it is funded through the general fund transfer. Since our libraries cover the county, is it an equal infusion from county and city to support our library?
Know the split for our city. I'm looking at Brandy because she knows the library fund a lot more in depth. From the county, I know they fund all of their libraries separate. So the city is not infusing money into the county libraries. And I know that the general fund transfer is 1.5 million per year from the general fund to our city local libraries. I can't remember their overall budget. So
I thought our libraries have, doesn't the city oversee the library in Page? Isn't it a joint venture?
yes, yeah, we oversee all of those libraries, not all of them, but most of them. But county tax is paying for the county libraries. So the city's not infusing any city money into the county libraries.
That's what I was getting at.
Yeah, sorry. That I can answer. I just couldn't remember the percentage. Yeah, so we don't contribute any city funds to the county libraries. They're 100%.
But we've staffed them
We staff them with city staff, but they are paid
by the county.
by the county tax. There's definitely conversations on splits of funding for some of our staff that.
Maybe Linda has her hand up as well.
Oh, I can't see hands.
They're right over there, but you're
Go
right.
ahead, Linda.
Yeah.
I would just clarify that we distribute funds to the Page Library, but that is not one of our branches. We do not actually manage that one.
Linda, while we have you, this is Greg. Could you give us a quick summary of the libraries that we do, that the city does have under its umbrella out there? You mentioned Page, but what are the other ones?
So the ones that we actually manage and are staffed by city employees
Yes.
include the downtown library and East Flagstaff. And I'm counting so I don't forget anybody. Let's see, Grand Canyon Library, Forest Lakes, Tuba City, the Detention Center Library, and we have 2 bookmobiles, one that goes out to the county and one that is primarily for preschools and is more in the city.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Right, moving on. Also, a special revenue fund is our transportation funds. So there are 4 different funds that actually we break out because of the different limitations and restrictions on our transportation taxes. So the first one is the transit fund. This fund did just get approval to increase their tax rate effective 7/1/25. New rates. We have road repair and street safety. We have Lone Tree Overpass Fund, as well as the Prop 419 Transportation Improvement. Some additional special revenue funds are the Bed Board and Beverage, or BBB funds, you'll hear them referred to as. This includes beautification, economic development, tourism, arts and science, and recreation. Those as well just got extended. We have the Park Flag, which is the downtown parking fees, which fund the operation of our downtown parking and the Park Flag operation. We have the Water Resource and Infrastructure Protection Fund, which is often referred to as RIP, if you're saying that. This is a relatively new fund. It's been around a couple of years now, and this is what's supporting the wildland operations to protect our water resources and infrastructure. Activities such as forest thinning efforts, etc., are completed by the group that is supported by this fee. This group is also supported by a large number of grants. Next, we have our enterprise funds. So our enterprise funds are set up a lot to run like a business. So these are self-supporting through user fees. So we have many user fee ordinances which restrict the use of these funds. They include water, wastewater, trash charges. These are the different fees that you will see on a municipal bill. So on our bills, we have water, wastewater, stormwater, solid waste, which is our trash and recycling, sustainability fee, which is a percentage of all the other fees, which is funding our sustainability efforts. We also have rents. This is from mostly in our housing authority. And then at the airport, we have many leases and fees as well. All the funds that are included here is enterprise funds, water, wastewater, reclaimed water, stormwater, solid waste, sustainability and environmental, airport, and Flagstaff Housing Authority, or FHA. The next group of funds are our capital project funds. Capital project funds are used to account for major capital projects or acquisitions, separate from ongoing operations. These are restricted funding sources. They include things such as our voter-approved bonds or our general obligation, or GO bonds, grants, 34 third-party restrictions. Our general obligation bond projects that are currently active include the Flagstaff Urban Trail System, or FOOTS Open Space Land Acquisition Fund. We have a little bit of money left from a bond on that. Our Watershed Protection Fund, we are spending the last little bit that we have left on that GO bond, as well as the 2 newest through Prop 441 and 442 for our infrastructure and housing. We also have the USGS campus expansion that is in a capital project fund, as well as our newest addition, the Downtown Mile. This particular project has a significant grant that was secured. This is multi-millions and millions of dollars of a project, which is why it's in a capital project fund to segregate it. We do have a lot of other money being infused from other funds though. So stormwater is contributing, Prop 419 is contributing to this project in SF. So there's a lot of funding sources, but it's all restricted, and then we have it in this fund for tracking purposes. Another group of funds we have are our debt service funds. The debt service funds are specifically used to account for the accumulation of resources and payment of principal and interest on our long-term debt. So we have general obligation bond fund, which is secondary property tax fund. And this is the fund that is paying back the GO bonds for those capital projects we were just mentioning. We also have the pension bond fund. This fund was created due to payment of our PSPRS debt service for funding the PSPRS. This fund also includes the contingency reserve in case we do drop below 100% funded specifically for the PSPRS. That fund is, those debt payments on the pension bond fund are paid through the general fund, the water resource and infrastructure fund, as well as their, since they do have police and fire. And there's the last fund. This is the general fund. The general fund accounts for all revenues and expenditures used to finance the traditional services associated with the municipal government, not accounted for in other funds. So essentially, if I have not already talked about it, it falls here. So this obviously includes police, fire, administrative services, and pros, just to name a few of the items. And that is all I have on. Oh, sorry, I have one more slide. We'll go into depth a little bit more on general fund. So the main revenues that support the general fund include the city's 1% city sales tax, franchise tax, primary property tax, state shared revenues, which include sales tax, income tax, and the VLT or vehicle license tax. We have licenses and permits, which includes things such as building permits, fines and forfeitures, which include court fines, for example. And then user fees, which are charges for services for areas such as community development, recreation, police, fire, and cemetery. Now this concludes my presentation on the color of money. Questions on any of that? All right. Well, thank you. I'm going to hand it over to Rick Tatter now, and he's going to talk about the city's new budget section. Nice job, Heidi. Thank you.
I'm definitely excited to talk to you about this new section that we have within management services. It's been a long time coming. We've been thinking about this for several years as we've grown as an organization. As you know, currently our finance section is the one that oversees the budget and the financial reports, payroll, AP, and all those things. And as Greg alluded to earlier today, is the amount of effort and time put into our budget process has changed over time. We've been able to be, okay, we're doing budget this time of year, then financial, then budget, and then financial. But now they're just kind of just all going together full blast 12 months a year with the inclusion of more grants, more capital projects. A lot of work is going now within the finance section. So we started to approach this 4 or 5 years ago about how do we address this? How do we bolster our budget area for the city of Flagstaff? And there's also been a lot of other changes to kind of push us in this type of direction. So our new budget section is really focused on the fact that we are a year-round team. This section attends all these budget, help prepare for all these things. We help prepare budgets and a lot of work related year-round things. Priority-based budgeting was a new thing we implemented. We're in our 6th year of running with priority-based budget. This team is the one who will provide that oversight of the program, how it works, how we train, how we update and review our priorities and objectives. Training is a big effort that we put in. So there's a lot of lift for that area of the community outreach. We like to refresh these every 2 to 4 years as we change councils and want to make sure we're on the same path. So this team would have that task on their plate. Complex operations and capital improvements. Heidi mentioned we have 50 funds now. We've grown as an organization. We've got a lot of buckets of funds and restrictions, and we want to make sure we're providing the right budgetary help for all these funds in the organization, as well as the number of divisions we have. We're up to 15 divisions in the city. That's different than we were 10 years ago, which is great. We're elevating and we're keeping our organization growing over time. So the ability to support those divisions is really critical for us. Capital improvements, yeah, that's grown quite a bit. Not only the fact we have many different tax types that we've got to manage with all the capital projects, but the quantity of projects, the grant funding, assuring that we budget the right amounts of appropriations for each fund each year, and working with the capital improvements team. We want to really elevate our communication in the organization about budget. It's really not something we had a lot of time to be proactive about. We're making a lot of changes now. We're putting deadlines on calendars, helping people understand where we are in deadlines and processes. We're educating, we're doing presentation extended leadership about the budget and processes. So we're really enhancing that area for our organization. User fees and rate studies, the analysis and coordination. This has kind of been stalled out for several years. We haven't brought a lot of miscellaneous user fees. You have seen some big ones, water, stormwater, those. But there's a lot of other user fees in the organization, a lot of charges for services that have rates that are set by council. It's your decision how much we recover on many areas like recreation, community development, those types of areas. But we wanted to have a coordinated effort so that we're not all come to council at one time with fees and then you don't hear from us. We want to have a coordinated effort with our organization, because we're looking at this budget section to be the coordinating points and help advance analysis, working with internal users to set rates or with consultants in the future. We want to do some more enhanced review of revenues. Kind of the cycle is we look at them as we go into budget processes, we kind of update, we review them, but we haven't had an eye on the month-to-month activity. We really need to put a little more focus on make sure we are collecting, we're billing, and our revenues are meeting the expectations for all the funds, all the 50 funds, making sure they're recorded in the right spot. So we want this team to really step up and be that support for this organization, all the divisions, all the funds throughout the city. So there's a lot of work that we're putting on this team, and I'm thrilled to have this section in place now. This comes with giving hiring staff that have that focus for budget, that knowledge, the expertise to be analyzing versus just accounting and placing numbers in place. Our team's been doing great. We've been doing both sides within finance, but it takes a little effort going back and forth. But now we have a focus of a section to help with that in our organization, to do the analysis and really support where we grow in the future. But this helps build capacity. This is another bonus of creating a section. It creates a capacity for a couple areas in our organization. Our finance team, they are constantly working on grants and reimbursements. The level is just amazing right now. It's great stuff. We're bringing lots of money for our organization, but it takes a lot of work month by month. We sign off on dozens and dozens of grant reimbursements. So this frees up their time to really focus on that. It's really hard during budget season to be doing grants. It's just, they overlap so much. Focus on, go ahead.
Is this new section, is this just a transfer of employees?
Talk about that in a second. The charts.
Okay.
Focusing on the audit, the reporting, the expenditures year to date, and those kind of things. Payroll is a big focus for this team. Changes there have been quite substantial. Our customer service team is now focused on customer service. They used to be the revenue and user fee group, but now they have that focus. Our customers are really important, and now we've got a team built up for that focus in our organization. A couple areas not noted on here is city manager's office. As we went into priority-based budgeting, we did as a team with the city manager's office and worked to build the program over time. Cyril Langley at one point and Chris Brody, an amazing part of our team, and they've He's been part of the budget team the last several years. By us now taking the role, the responsibilities, we now free up Chris to those critical things they need in the city manager's office. Economic Vitality loaned us Jack Fitchman for quite a while to help us build and develop this program. And now they've got that resource back for them. So it's a balance of resources also that helps with us aligning a new budget section. So here's the picture of what we look at, not as a management services division now. I wore green to identify I'm the green bubble in the middle. Did not purposely do that. Just noticed that this morning. So color coordinated. It's the money thing, I guess.
Right, green too.
So yeah, I'm just surrounded by many amazing divisions, section leaders, not divisions, section leaders, and staff. We have our customer service section, formerly revenue section. We have grants, contracts, and emergency management is a newer section that was elevated because of the workloads and our focus we want to have there. Purchasing staff, purchasing is a section of management services. Finance has been a long-standing management services section. And there you see the budget section. That's the newer branch of management services that was approved during last year's budget process. Last year's budget process, I appreciate the funding for a budget director. This is a new position that we put in place. We have not hired this. We're still working on the paperwork, job description, classification, and we'll be going out to hire that one shortly. So we're looking for a new leader in our organization to take up this section over time. The other positions in this section were really a makeup of existing positions that were approved. So we only add really one position to create this budget section. So we took a position from customer service that did the revenue stuff, and we took a few positions from finance so we can push their focus to budget. So the assistant budget manager, the budget analyst, and the senior budget analyst all were existing FTEs, just repurposed and rehired for a specific focus. In our budget section right now, we do have several positions hired. It's the two vacants. One's the budget director and the senior budget analyst, but we're working hard to get those filled. Our assistant budget manager, we hired John Comer in the back there. He's also part of our budget team. He started with us last summer. And we have two of our budget analyst positions filled, Amir Saya and Tammy Ryan back there. They've been integral this year. Really, they've helped us move to the focus of communication and helping the organization, the budget section. Well, we couldn't just do it with that group. We really still need the support of our finance team as we continue to grow over. So we're working really hard together to shift work and still be part of a team with the budget section while we wait to hire some more. So Heidi Derryberry's been very focused on the budget side. Brandy's still leading the entire team until it gets moved over to the budget section, as well as three of our senior accountants, Tom Johnson, Ann Thompson, and Gloria Stousen, are really integral to make sure we're still moving budget forward as we develop this team, as we move. Did you have a question?
Yeah. Is this going to be your hire?
Yes.
These vacancies?
Yes.
So how much are you focused in on the priority-based budgeting aspect? What we do? I mean, obviously it's what we do and it's central to everything. Are you going to be looking for a director that intimately understands priority-based budgeting versus other kinds of budgeting, or are they going to learn on the job? Or because I know it's still kind of unique what we do.
I want to hire the best person. That's my main focus. They may not have specific priority-based budgeting purposes, but you hire the right person for the position who can grow into it, educate and learn. There
I
are
just realized there's
many.
many scarcity of candidates out there that deeply, that have
Love their government budget.
lots of experience.
Tons out there. But there are so many different budgeting methods, in any city, they may have a different type of budgeting focus. It's how they succeed and how they deliver for their own organization. So getting the best candidates is really my priority. I think they can learn this. I think this is something our organization has really grown and we understand it. So. That's how our organization will look once we get some hires done. And with that, I just want to close. If you as council, want to have a budget orientation, a budget 101 session with our team, currently Brandy is definitely willing to meet with you and have a conversation about what's budget for organization, in the budget book, talk about those kind of things. So please reach out to Brandy and schedule a time to have that conversation. We'd be happy to explain things that maybe you're curious about. But as management services, if there's any area that you're interested in learning more about, I definitely open up that opportunity to talk about, financials, purchasing, procurement, grants, contracts, emergency management, or customer service aspects. Please reach out to me. I'll be glad to sit down with you and have my team sit down with you and talk about our operations. Questions? Thank you.
I have a question, and this may not be the exact form, but over this past year, I've heard multiple times where we kind of have a backlog or a slowdown in purchasing, getting the, somebody has a request to get it approved or processed. Is this shift going to free that up so that can take on a new pace?
This shift did not add capacity to procurement purchasing at this time. We're looking at other ways. We're looking at how we can streamline some things. We're looking at software potentially, so we can track and watch and edit the procurement process. That's one we're really spending a lot of time on. And we are also probably looking at additional staffing potentially for next fiscal year. But yeah, this does not add the efficiency over there.
I was just curious because I saw you mentioned taking borrowing staff and taking it over, so I didn't know if that was going to be affected. Update on that.
Great. And that's all I have. Any other questions? Okay.
Good morning, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and Council. Brady Suda, serving as the city's finance director. So this next section, we are going to talk about maintaining the city's fiscal health. City of Flagstaff has implemented and adopted many policies to ensure the city's fiscal health and to make sure that we have the ongoing resources to meet the needs of our community and to plan for the future and be fiscally sound. So in this next section, we're going to talk about overall fiscal responsibilities, policies, balance reserve policy, multi-year planning, and our recession planning. The city has numerous fiscal policies to ensure we stay fiscally sound and responsible organization. Some of those key policies around budget include ensuring we have a structurally balanced 5-year plan for all of our funds. So this means that ongoing expenditures are funded with routine, ongoing revenues so that the services that we're providing to our community or ongoing commitments made to our employees not only are funded today, but for many years to come. We also want to ensure that our revenue estimates are achievable and even a bit conservative at times, and that a portion of our more volatile revenues are reserved for one-time purchases and expenditures so that if we see a decline in those volatile revenues, it does not have a significant impact. on our ongoing operations. We want to use our excess fund balances or cash balances to be used for one-time expenditures and not ongoing operational needs within our organization. For the general fund, we maintain a 20% minimum fund balance policy, which is a percentage of our ongoing revenues. Our 5-year plans do include recessionary cycles included in our revenue projections. Historically, recessions happen on average every 7 years, so we want to be prepared and budget those within our 5-year plans. We also want to ensure we have a robust annual budget process for the city, as well as lastly, we want to look at rates and user fees to be reviewed regularly and updated as needed. So being fiscally responsible and having strong fiscal policies, the city has consistently received strong bond ratings. The city is viewed as very low risk, and there is very strong confidence in our ability to pay our debt service payments. These bond ratings allow the city to issue debt with some of the best possible interest rates, saving us money on interest expense on the city's debt issuances. The city's GO or general obligation bonds are is our highest rated debt issues, as they are backed by secondary property taxes. And as you can see in the chart on the screen, 2 of our 3 rating agencies have rated us just 1 rating below the top rating. And our revenue bonds, as well as our COPs or certificates of participation debt, is rated just 1 rating below our GO bond ratings. And just to note, Moody's and Fitch recently upgraded the city's ratings during fiscal year 2024 under Rick Patter's leadership. That is very exciting. First time it happened, I think, in the 17 years I've been with the city.
It's the gap between high grade and prime. So like, what else would we have to do to get up there? Or is that probably not gonna happen?
That's our next goal.
The next goal. Right.
For a city?
It's very hard for
That would-
smaller municipalities.
Yeah, I would say that's usually larger organizations probably have that opportunity. It's pretty rare to be at that higher level, but we are very excited with our improved ratings. So you can see with Standard & Poor, we are a AA with a positive outlook. Moody's we're a AA1, and Fitch we're a AA+ with a look. So very exciting. And now going into a little bit deeper dive into one of our key fiscal policies, the fund balance reserve policies. So fund balance reserve is important for any organization. We follow the best practices and guidance of GFOA, or our Government Finance Officers Association, for the appropriate level of unrestricted, unreserved fund balance for the city's funds. GFOA best practices provide guidance at setting the appropriate level of fund balance based on the various levels of risk for each organization, as well as how to use and replenish if a portion of the reserve is drawn down to continue to deliver services to our community. Finding the right balance and level is really important, right? We don't want to hold too high of an unrestricted fund balance, as we could use those resources for important needs within our community and organization. We also don't want something too low, putting the city at risk during economic or other significant changes or events. Adequate fund balance reserves is critical to assist in balancing economic risk. It's not necessarily an emergency fund, as there is not a budget for possible expenditures such as contingency funds. Fund balance is more of a balance sheet account. It is not a budgeted item to be spent each fiscal year. it is more appropriate to be used as a temporary offset when revenues are not being met at our estimated projections. Fund balance is also necessary to ensure we have adequate cash flow for our organization to ensure we can pay our bills timely. Yeah.
So across the board is our, general fund reserves, what is it, 20%? You go.
Yep, next slide. Yep. So kind of going straight into that. For general fund, our fund balance reserve is a minimum of 20% or approximately $16.6 million as calculated as a percentage of ongoing revenues. Per GFOA, we did the exercise to review what they recommended. And they recommend based on our level of risk, right? Taking into various things, right? The types of revenues we have, the types of operations we provide, has determined that we should be somewhere in that 17 to 25%. So that's probably, we have that. Our special revenue funds, most of our special revenue funds have a 10%. There's a couple exceptions. That includes highway user revenue funds. We keep that fund balance at 20% of ongoing revenues, as gasoline tax tends to be a little more volatile, as well as in the past, there was risk of state sweeps of this fund. So we have increased that one for that reason. We review these fund balance policies every year to see if there's any adjustments that need to be made. One change that we made during the fiscal year 25 budget process was at increasing our BBB tourism fund balance to 20%. Understanding the importance of this fund during an economic downturn and having those available resources if needed.
What is the state sweep of those?
So during the Great Recession, the state collects all the gasoline taxes, right? And so what was happening is they actually, before they distributed the monies to cities and towns and counties, they actually swept a portion off the top to fund some of their operations, DPS and things like that. And so we got a smaller percentage of the pie.
Do we have a threat of that happening again?
I have not heard anything. I would say it was pretty dramatic and impactful when it happened back in the Great Recession.
But it was for a purpose.
Yes, they had to still ensure it met the regulations on what you can use highway user revenue funds for. Yeah, absolutely.
So why is water services fund at 25%? It was a hot topic last year with rate increases, and that just more to maintain that.
So I might have Rick Hatter come up and he knows a lot more details of this. I know the 25% is a policy that was adopted by council to maintain that 25%. And while it is a larger amount, it is really, truly, it's not an ongoing pot. So once we get to 25%, it's just maintaining that 25% as revenues increase. So it's not.
Was that a policy approved when we approved the rate increase?
No, that was prior.
There's no which policy, but there was a policy that council reviewed and I believe adopted that said the water service funds fund 25%.
Remember when that was? I mean, was it within the last 2 years or was it?
This was several years ago.
It was actually, was it during the last rate study?
It was
Previous one?
It was in place for quite a while. One of the thoughts to it though is, your water funds have some major infrastructure, major capital needs. If they have a material break or facility issue, it's not just about recessions, it's about, okay, we may need that cash flow for repairs or such as we go through the year. So that's another reason why water services has that higher amount.
And that was why we approved the water rate increase to cover those infrastructure replacement and.
The unknowns. Yeah.
Maybe Erin has some insight on this.
She's just put it in the chat.
Like Brandy said, this is not an annual contribution that people are paying. It's set at this amount, it has this dollar amount, and that's what we maintain. It's not people adding to the fund every year after year. to the reserve.
As folks can't see the chat, Aaron Young noted that the policy is in the 2014 Council Adopted Principles of Sound Water Management Water Policies chapter.
That it just addressed water and wastewater, but we're applying it to all the funds.
Yes.
I think it would help people understand if you used the bathtub analogy for the water services funds. You're just keeping the level at a quarter of the bathtub.
Exactly. Yep. We had a quarter full at all times. Thank you. All of our other enterprise funds are at the 10% level, as well as all of our capital project funds maintain that 10%. Any questions about our any additional questions related to our capital reserve?
Are those funds, I mean, just help me envision this. Is it like a savings account or do you have them in investments that are easy to pull out?
So it's not quite that, right? We have, we do invest a lot of our excess cash in investments. So we have a combination of investments that are, and Rick probably can talk about the investment policy a little more detailed, but we do have very liquid investments. All of our money that even the money that we have in our checking account actually earns interest with our current, with Wells Fargo. And so as well as we have investments in treasuries and other things as well. So we try to maximize our interest earnings, especially during this time.
Appreciate it. And I'll get with you guys. I realize. Yeah.
To a transportation conference and there was a lot of talk about the HERF funds going down. Do we have a plan or when that? I mean, it's happening, but years down the road, it's a significant amount.
Yeah, I mean, we are very conservative in our HERF revenue projections. And we watch those very closely to look for trends and analyze those month over month regularly. We have still seen some increases in our HERF revenues so far, but we are projecting that they will level out. So while there probably isn't an immediate need, maybe in the next few years, but looking at maybe a 10-year outlook, it's about the user revenue. But we have also adopted, right? We have our road repair street safety that helps supplement our overlay and chip seal program for streets, as well as our transportation improvement fund.
Just to piggyback off that very briefly, do we see this leveling off because of e-vehicles?
Yes, right. Yep. So less sales. Yep. And there's not an offsetting fee or anything that helps supplement those vehicles that are electricity.
Why they're talking about it decreasing.
Just to, jump in on this, I think we're in a pretty good spot, Flagstaff and Coconino County, because we have the I-40 traffic. So I think our HERF revenue has done better than other counties around the state.
But we do watch it really closely.
Thank you.
That's one that sometimes stresses us out. So also, multi-year planning is very important to the city's annual budget process to ensure services that we promise today can be delivered in the long term. So we're not looking at this 1 year's budget and trying to balance just this year's budget. Every time we're bringing a balanced budget to City Council for recommendation, we are looking at a minimum 5 years, in most cases, 10 years. We present 5 years in the budget book, but we are trying to balance a 10-year outlook for every single fund. Important components to a multi-year planning include, again, reasonable, achievable revenue estimates and projections. You'll probably hear we tend to be a little more conservative than the state in our projections, especially when it comes to state shared revenues. So we have those resources to fund our operations. We also build in, again, recession plans into all of our 5-year plans. So we have those recessionary periods built in. And we want to have a structurally balanced funds, which means that our ongoing expenditures are balanced with ongoing capacity. Do not want to add a new program or provide a new service that is only funded with one-time service. We want to make sure that we have the ongoing resources to fund operations long term. We also build all of our 5-year plans with annual compensation increases. And we want to use excess cash balances, often referred to as one-time capacity, to fund one-time needs or purchases such as capital items. We obtain, the reason we have those one-time capacity or excess cash is usually one of two things. One, our actual revenues exceed our projections, or we see expenditure savings from a prior fiscal year. Mostly, I'm going to talk about our recession plan, and I did email a copy of that plan to all members of council. So for your reference, as we talk about the next few slides. So in the fall of 2019, we did see some declining revenues, and with the guidance and direction of our city manager, the budget team started to work on developing the city's recessionary plan, which was later adopted and soon after needed for to be implemented in March of 2020, and used this plan throughout. I'm going to provide, really a high-level overview of the city's recession plan and how this plan identifies action steps to address declining revenues. In the document that I emailed, it includes the purpose of planning for recessions, provides an understanding of indicators to watch for of a possible recession. It also helps provide an understanding of how the different funds may be impacted differently depending on the type of recession, and how reserves and contingencies play a role in adopting or use during a recession. So our recession plan is independent of the budget adoption. We really use it as an overlay on top of the budget. This means that if we see declining revenues, regardless of the time of the year, we can act quickly to implement any needed measured actions, right? So that way, if it's a very quick recession, we're not hindering ourselves by adopting a significantly lower budget, but we are able to just use that to help curb expenditures. Use our recession plan as a guide. We want to have it be adaptable to implement. As we know, recessions can vary greatly in duration, right? They can be very quick and steep, or they can be long-lasting and more severe. So that's why we want to be able to be adaptable as we implement, and that's why it gives us guiding ideas and actions that we can take to balance. As we move through the recession plan stages, there's 5 stages that I'll go through in a couple of slides, but as we go through those, once we reach stage 3 or the significant stage, which is a 5 to 10% reduction in revenues or higher, it does require council action. And this action is really giving the city manager direction on the different measures we want to take to address our declining revenues. The primary focus of the recession plan is the expenditure side. So now we know we have declining revenues. Now we focus on what we want to do for spending. So we want to look at operating more on the operating side, but also look at the capital side. Capital being capital improvement projects or equipment purchases. And we want to make very strategic operating expenditure adjustments while maintaining the right level of service for our community, especially in areas like public safety. For capital items, we may look at deferring purchases or reprioritizing capital projects to better match the timing of the revenue projections. A large focus of our recession plan is on the general fund, as it is generally the most significantly impacted by a recession. for the fiscal year 2025 budget, the general fund operating budget makes up 39% of the total city operating budget. Right, and that's where we have our police and safety and many of our essential services in our community. Also, as a budget team, we didn't want to just focus on cutting costs, right? We also want to ensure the recession plan provides for investing dollars in areas that will help offset or lessen the impact of recession, such as maybe providing additional funding for tourism and marketing or construction in our community. So this slide goes through the 5 stages of recession plan based on the percentage of reduced revenues in the city's general fund and the recommended action for each stage. In the minor stage, which is up to a 2% decline, this is relatively easy, right? We look at looking for reasonable opportunities to reduce cost and save that money. At the moderate stage, we're looking at a 2 to 5% decline in revenues, where we'll be looking at possibly reducing or postponing travel, delaying large purchases, or maybe even leaving vacant positions open, unfilled longer to adjust for those declining revenues. I got my notes out of order here. Yeah,
While you're
absolutely.
looking at your notes, just to give a little more elaboration to what you just said, because I think it helps put this in perspective. I asked Rick earlier how far into this plan we went a few years back during the outset of COVID. We actually did touch upon this significant level. Fortunately, it was short term. It was only a couple of months. Because of the pandemic, we were not adjusting personnel because, quite frankly, a lot of our labor at the time was furloughed in some form because facilities were being shuttered. So like Parks and Rec specifically. We also looked at where this recession plan, had it occurred in Flagstaff way back during the Great Recession, where we would have seen it applied. And I think during that, and of course that was a severe recession and it did last for a long time, we would have hit the major category.
That is correct. We saw 30% decline in revenues.
Yes, and not getting into all the fine print here, but at that level, we're looking at employee reductions. We're suspending a lot of services, major service cuts, not suspension, but cuts. Reduction in capital expenditures, draw down on reserves, going back to the question of just a short while ago about fund balances. That's the significance there. When we get to that level of a recession, we are dipping into those fund balances significantly. And closure of non-essential city facilities. Again, not to equate that with what happened during COVID for an entirely different reason. City facilities for an entirely different reason, but it had the same impact. So just to give some context to that, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great point, Council or Manager.
Got it
Right, I know you did. You did. City Manager Clifton. Right. It just shows we want to have a lot of ability to be adaptable in our recession plan because with different types of recessions, and we want to be able to make adjustments quickly and choose which actions we want to take and need to take to be fiscally sound. So at the significant stage, which is between that 5 to 10% decline, this is where it requires significant justification and vetting of large capital purchases, looking at hiring freezes except for essential positions, possible reduction in force for maybe our part-time or contracted positions. And at this point, given that these actions are much more significant, we're working closely with council and getting policy direction on the necessary actions needed. And then at the last 2 stages, the major, which is a 10 to 20% decline or a crisis level at over 20%, the city would need to make some significant cuts to services and capital, as well as considering a reduction in force and drawing down of our reserves, along with probably many other reductions that may be necessary. So with that, that's, do we have any questions regarding our session plan?
Maybe I missed this in the presentation, but the dollar amount on like, let's say the crisis one shows 16 million.
Yes, we did update this slide for, so the last time we updated the actual document was 2022. We have updated this slide now for updated revenues based on 2025 budget. So you might see a little bit of a different number coming through. Yes, thank you for that question.
And I think that probably should be a greater than sign rather than the less than, just a
You're,
clerical thing.
oops.
No, that's okay. I want to tie a few things together, and what a wonderful presentation. Thank you, Randy, and thank you. All of the presenters touched on some things that could be tied together a little bit here. When you look at this recession plan, as did our bond raters, when they look at fiscal policies, they look at this, they looked at the fund balance policies that we just talked about. Reference was made earlier to the public safety, I always get that.
Public safety retirement system.
Retirement system, yeah, PRS. We paid off an unfunded pension liability 5 years ago to the tune of $130 million, and taking off the books a huge liability for the city that was encumbering our general fund significantly. And we did that through a financial instrument that Brandy made reference to, the certificates of participation. And doing that, it not only unencumbered some revenues in the general fund, but it demonstrated to all of our public safety personnel a huge investment in their future as well. So I think it was symbolic, and I think it was meaningful in terms of budgetary impact in a positive way. I think it was alluded to in these presentations, but I'll make mention of it now. The city has in recent years and continues now have a relatively low debt service. Partly and because of what I just mentioned, but in general, a lot of our debts have been paid down. Our annual audits, Councilmember Matthews is part of the audit team, have been squeaky clean. They've been stellar each and every year. And the GFOA awards, and how many of those have you received now? What a nice segue into that.
Right?
How many years? I had no
Oh my
idea that was
goodness.
the next slide.
29 years, is that Rick?
29 years of a GFOA award going to this team. All of those things were considered in our bond ratings, and you saw the outcome of that, the improved ratings, which basically is putting the city now in even a better place should there be future bond issuances. Even on setting that aside, having those high ratings is wonderful for the city. To all of these good policies that have been put into place, and the bond raters have told us these things. They have looked closely at all of these policies, and so I'm just beating your drum a little bit, Brandy, and your team, Rick and Heidi and others, because there's a lot to show for the things that have been just now discussed.
Yeah, and I just add, we have an amazing team of very professional, dedicated staff to the city to ensure, right, we maintain that fiscal health. Again, as Manager Clifton, oh my goodness. We have received the certificate of achievement for both our financial reporting as well as the Distinguished Budget Award from GFOA for 20 plus, probably close to 30 years now, as well as we have an amazing team on our purchasing side and has achieved the achievement of excellence. So thank you. That concludes my presentation. Any other questions for me?
We're in a break now, correct?
minutes. We're running about 5 minutes behind schedule, so let's take a break. We were scheduled till 10. Let's go to 10:05, so that way we all get 10 minutes for some self-care.
10:05 from this or that?
From this, from the. That one's off.
Really chair.
Stacy throwing furniture.
Yeah. There's been a violent outbreak.
Wow.
I'm good. Sorry.
Good. Are we back streaming?
Yes, ma'am. We captured that all of it.
Okay. Thank you all, and we're going to continue on here. I want to make an introduction, but first I want to go with the movie theme that seems to have emerged this morning. And the movie that I love and always have loved is Forrest Gump. It's just one of my favorites. Of course, the movie is about many things, and it does have ties to Flagstaff, right? But one of the central themes in it is the long distance running. And we have some long distance runners in our audience. I know of a few of them, not all of them, but a few of them that I'll single out because Joanne, after today's presentation, you're off to Miami to do a half marathon. And Vice Mayor, yes, Vice Mayor has participant in half triathlons. Yes. And John Comer, where are you, John? John is a long distance runner. And he's off to Red Rock, Nevada next week, right? So, yeah.
Not a long distance runner, but I run.
Yeah, you run. I'm not a long distance runner either, Forrest, but I sip espresso in pajamas. I am elated to introduce to you Kathy Novak, and Kathy and I actually go back a little bit, several years, many years, because I came from Colorado and worked with municipalities and had involvement with the Colorado Municipal League for many years, and crossed paths with Kathy. And I'm going to give you her bio here, but she has been before this group a few times now, and so you are getting it from the best when we talk about priority-based budgeting. You're getting it from the source, and so we're excited to have her here. She flew in, got into Flagstaff at 1:30 in the morning, and here she is. So it was no easy task for her to get here, and we're so honored. Kathy Novak is an associate teaching professor for the Daniels College of Business at the University of Denver, where she also serves as the faculty champion for student success and career readiness for management majors. Outside the university, she is the Institute Director for the Colorado Municipal Clerks Institute, Stacy, and has a small consulting practice working with local governments. Kathy has, and this is the remarkable part, 19 years of elected service, 11 years as a member of the North Glen City Council, North Glen being a big, I'm not going to call it a suburb, but a big Front Range municipality right next to Denver, and an additional 8 years as mayor. She was term limited in 2010. During her time in public office, she served as president of the National League of Cities in 2009. Let me impress upon you how big that is. National League of Cities represents about 2,700 cities throughout the country. Correct me.
19,000 cities, towns, and villages.
When I say 2,700, I meant 20, okay, 19,000.
Yep.
Thank you for that correction. I don't know where I got the number I was looking at. 19,000. I was going to say 27,000, but it's 19,000. And has been around that institute for 100 years, give or take.
Celebrated.
27,000 cities with a history of over 100 years. Kathy earned her Master of Science in Management from the University of Colorado at Denver, undergrad in Business Administration from the University of Colorado at Boulder, earned her Public Leadership credentials from the Harvard Kennedy School, She has been teaching management at the graduate and undergraduate levels since 1991 and at the University of Denver since 2012. Her awards are many, and I'm going to go through them real fast. 2023 University of Denver Faculty Award for being responsive to the needs of students with learning disabilities and/or differences, presented by the University of Denver Learning Effectiveness Program. 2023 Faculty Spotlight Service Excellence Award, as presented by the University of Denver Disability Services Program, nominated for the 2023 Faculty Excellence in Teaching Award from the Daniels College of Business, 2022 Faculty Service Excellence Award from the Daniels College of Business, 2019 Institute Director Award of Excellence from the International Institute of Municipal Clerks, the 2012 John V. Christensen Award for working strong representative local government and regionalism in solving mutual problems, Channel 9 News Leader of the Year for 2003, Businesswoman of the Year awarded by the Metro North Chamber of Commerce, Excellence in Teaching Award from the Regis University, and was awarded the Marshall Memorial Fellowship for Travel in summer of 2002. And if that's not impressive enough, just recently, her grandson took fifth place in an equestrian event at the Denver Stock Show. And what's remarkable about that is he is 12 years old and is the youngest to be a recipient of that. Please join me in welcoming Kathy Novak.
Always a little weird hearing that. It's like, oh man, I hope I haven't set expectations too high. It is an honor and a pleasure to be with you all once again. I see several familiar faces and some new faces. And sitting in the back here, watching what has transpired so far, demonstrates to me how well and how hard the city of Flagstaff works to ensure that the budget is in fact the most important policy document. It aligns your community priorities and the planning and allocating the available resources to meet those needs and priorities. Now, one of the things I want to talk about is just how you alluded to it, that we do things a little differently here. We're a little unique. I don't think you realize how unique you are. You know, when a fish doesn't know it's in water until it gets out of water. And those of you who have been around, the newcomers, you don't know how other cities do. What you do here really is cutting edge, leading edge. And I did the math, right? That PBB really exists in North America. So if you look at all the units of local government in North America, it's about 94,600. So that's municipalities, counties, school districts, special districts, the US and Canada. There are only 200 practicing party executives. That puts you in the top 0.25% of all these municipalities. And so what I want to do is just kind of shine a spotlight on my experience and why PBB is, I think, so important to communities. As Greg mentioned, you know, I was on council for a long time, and I became acquainted with priority-based budgeting when I was teaching at the University of Colorado in the School of Public Affairs. And these two men were wandering through the halls, and somebody said, "Oh, Kathy, I don't know, they want to talk about local government. You talk to them and get rid of them." I'll talk to them. So we sat down and we talked, and the more I talked to them, the more I realized that they had something that was really special and changing. And so I want to walk you through kind of that experience and how I think you guys are really in a great place. And you can see it in the community, and you can see it in the way you do things. This was not at all my process. And I still live in this amazing city. We're about 40,000, landlocked, only 6.5 square miles, except for 1 square mile We did a flagpole annexation to put our sewer plant. And now they're building homes up there and they're mad because it smells and it's like. But our budget process was very, very different. Our process would start, we were on calendar year. We would start kind of August to October and everybody dreaded it. Because it was council budget session, council budget session. Every off meeting night, it was a budget dog and pony show. And I'm going to share with you what my experience was like. This is a council meeting, not ours, but it's typical. And I want you to just look at that body language. This is that town administrator. And he's asked them a question. What do you see in that body language?
Thinking.
A lot of thinking.
No boredom.
Boredom.
Despair.
Yeah, that's what I see. It's like, look at this guy. He's like, oh, right?
They don't look like they have the answers.
They don't even have the questions. And that's really the point, right? When I was on council, that's how old it is, right? We had the 6-inch budget binder. I think for you all, it's a little different having the technology. You have the spreadsheets. It's hard to see how big it actually is, right? And I always knew we were in trouble because the finance director and staff would walk in like this with all the supporting documentation. We're like, oh. And we would open it up like you do, and it's spreadsheets. Now I have to give you a little background. I have a business degree, and I managed to take the fewest number of finance and accounting courses I could. Because, I mean, especially the accounting, right? It's like, I'm within like $100. Isn't that close enough? And they're like, no, it's not. My dad was a finance professor. And so he thinks this is really funny that I now do work with budgets and finance in cities. But I would look at this, and my husband is a spreadsheet guy. And he says, the numbers speak for themselves. I'm like, I can't hear them. I don't know what they're saying. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this. And this is how I felt at budget time, right? Like, our staff tried. I have to give them credit. They tried their best. We would have it, we would spread it out by department. It was like department by department presentation. Okay. We got a budget video one year. They would, trying to make it more exciting. They would take pictures of everything. I remember one year they brought in a big pipe to show us what the corrosion looked like. It was the most interesting council meeting we had. Here's a sewer pipe. Okay. Lots of show and tell like that. This is out of almost 19 years on council. There are 2 significant events that I remember. One was our public works guys came and they said, council, thank you so much for funding our new truck last year. We got this new truck. We've got it in the garage. It's working great. We've been able to do all this stuff. And this year, we really hate, but we have to ask you for a little bit more money. We're like, okay, sure. What do you need? He says, well, this is what happens to the truck right now. And they showed this video, the garage door going up, and it went up and it got to the top and it fell on top of the brand new truck. We're like, oh, can we have like $500 to fix the garage door? I'm thinking, it's like an $80 million budget. Asking us, that should be a no-brainer. That should even come to us. The other significant event I remember is spending 2.5 hours in one of those study sessions arguing about a $237 line item. Yeah, I don't remember what the line item is, but I remember the dollar amount because it was like, it's not even a rounding error. I didn't do well in finance and accounting, but I can do that in math. This isn't even worth our time. But problem is, oh, here's the other thing. Our staff tried to use graphs. I'm a visual person. No. And I think our finance directors, God love them, actually said, I'll pause for a moment so you can let this information see. You don't know what this is all about, right? This is how I felt with the budget. Lost, confused, unsure, unclear, perplexed, disoriented, bewildered. And it got to the point where I would get angry. And so much of the budget was stuff that we really couldn't weigh in on. It was already decided, previous policies. I didn't know what was supposed to do with this. And what's different about you guys is I think you're way beyond this, but most councils, they will look at this and they ask these questions. So what are these numbers really telling me? Is everything okay? Do we need to make cuts? Do we need to raise taxes? I'm not so sure. Do we actually have money to spend? Because it looks like there's money at the end, but what is this fund balance? And then I would see a spending into fund balance. Can we spend that money? And the staff would say, well, we can spend that money, but you can't spend that money. But we were in charge of the money. No, so I wasn't sure on what you wanted me to decide on, or are you just wanting my rubber stamp of approval? And when you talk, some of you have been around for a while, and when you talk to people in other cities and other communities, ask them what their budget's like. I did a presentation in front of ICMA one time, and we'd get to this point, and it was somebody else's city manager. And actually came up to me and said, honey, we do the hard work, so you don't have to worry your pretty little head about it. Thank you. Yes, right? I was like, wait a minute. I was elected to worry my pretty little head about it, right? So how do we, and this is my frustration. And so council's response is typically get out our calculators and we check the math because I don't know what else to do, right? And inevitably, in a huge budget like that, with lots and lots of spreadsheets, we could find a math error, right? And what did that convey to my citizens? That I read it. I went over it with a fine-tooth comb. Don't have any idea what it means, but I read it. And by pointing that out, how did it make my staff look? Geez, our finance department can't even put together a budget that doesn't have a math error? We didn't know what else to do. We'd start comparing the columns. Budget to budget, budget to actual, actual to actual. I don't know. And then we would get into line items, right? Big numbers, ask questions, try to look intelligent, what looks out of line. Oh, office supplies, that's a good one to talk about. Subscriptions, that's another good one. We can always attract travel and training, right? Because you don't know what to ask about the other big buckets. My frustrations, we sit through hours of presentations, but didn't really have any input. We would ask questions and our staff, not defensive, and I know some of our council were much more aggressive than others. We were treated like we just didn't understand. Got the message that, oh, trust us, we're the experts. And it was like, hands off. We'll just give it to you, just vote on it so we can file it with the state, and then you don't worry about it until next year. It's like, wait a minute, but I just got back from my municipal league meeting and all the trainings that said this is the most important policy document. I'm not seeing the connection, and they couldn't do it. We would come back, you know, as you all go to the Arizona League or go to other meetings, it's like, oh, here's a great idea. Nah, yeah, sorry. Council, we put a little budget line item in there. You guys have $250 each for your initiatives. You've probably seen that, right? You know, other cities who do that. There are untouchables that we can't discuss. Favorite night, not. Sorry, Chief. was when the police chief would come in, present his budget, full regalia, and stand with his, like this, his hand on his gun. Yeah, as if I'm gonna ask him questions about the dollars, I don't know.
Tactic.
But this is what I really wanted to know. How do I know, are we actually spending our dollars effectively? And are we doing what we and our citizens want done? I never saw the connections, right? Elected officials want to know, at least I wanted to know. What questions should I be asking about the budget? I really don't want to look stupid, right? They elected me. I am not stupid, but how do I make these connections? What do I need for the staff to show me, right? Show me, what do we do? Why do we need this? How effective is it? How is this helping us meet these priorities that I'm hearing from our citizens, but I can't see reflected in the actual budget document? How do I ask questions without the staff thinking that I'm micromanaging or that I'm out to get them? That's a really difficult line to walk, right? And how can all this data be turned into information that we can use to make decisions and set policy? How can we have better conversations about our resources and what we're trying to do during the budget process? So this is where I was. My term was over, and the priority-based budget, I called them the PBB boys. They were men, would come in, and we sat down, and I said, oh my gosh, if I would have had this, my time in office would have been fundamentally different. So that began my relationship with them. And I told them, I said, you know, this isn't just a budget tool. This is a culture shift. This is a change in the way that a community thinks about how we pool our dollars to create the kind of place that we all want to live in. And we put these people in charge of those dollars. We trust them to use them wisely to help us achieve the life that we want to live here in our community. Why is this important, especially if you look at trust in government? It has gone, I mean, near historic lows, right? From the 1960s, you can see it's a huge trajectory down. And when you look at even as local government, we're doing a whole lot better than state and federal. But this is still concerning, right? From just the shift downwards in favorable ratings and upwards in unfavorable ratings. Our citizens aren't buying it either, right? How can we be trustworthy? How can we be worthy of the dollars that they're all giving us, those hard-earned dollars? We have to show that we are trustworthy and transparent in what we're doing, how we're spending, toward what ends, right? This is why it was so important to me. Oh, and overwhelmingly, the majority of Americans think most elected officials don't care what people like them think. 85%. That's a hard environment to govern in. It's a hard environment to serve in. And I appreciate everything that you do because these are hard times to be doing what you're doing. And so PBB helps in all of that. You've seen your process, right? Most councils, I mean, I know a whole lot of communities where here's the budget. All right, we'll have a public hearing next week, then you approve it, and then we'll file it with the state. And then it kind of goes on the shelf and the electeds never hear about it again. It is the most important policy document you will adopt because what you do is based on how, I mean, where you choose to spend your money should reflect the priorities you're trying to achieve. So basically the process works, and I know Rick is going to get into more detail, so I'll just do high level, is that about 6 years ago, you started on this process that you began to figure out, well, what exactly do we do? Cities do a lot. How much does it actually cost us? Not just, you know, and I've heard so many times, well, we're gonna start this new program, but Sally, she has some free time, so it's only gonna cost us a little bit of her free time. Again, no, that's not really how it works. Because if it's in a building, you're paying for heating or air conditioning or the debt service on that. You're paying for the furniture, right? There's all these other costs that shouldn't just be lumped into some big hole that nobody understands. And that's what everybody, people who don't trust government, they look at that hole. Say this program, we know it costs more than that. So PBB gets to the bottom of that. And then there's this program scoring, which is like, why are we in business? What is the city here to do? What are the results we're trying to achieve? How do we prioritize? How do we define those? And then you measure what you do and how much it costs with the priorities that you have. And then you've got all this information that gives you a whole nother set of questions to ask. And that is really the beauty of this. So what I love about PBB is that it takes data, that line item budget, that really doesn't tell us much, right? To detail. It takes that data, it sorts it, it arranges it in different ways so we can look at it through different lenses, presents it visually, because numbers, you know, on a spreadsheet, moving the decimal, I don't see it, all that stuff. But then it gives us explained with a story. And now we have data and information that's actionable and useful. Are 0.0025% of the cities that can see the connection between the money they have, the resources they have, and be able to demonstrate directly how those resources benefiting the community, how we're using those precious dollars to build the Flagstaff that we all want to live in. I can't do that in my city. I still can't do it. I've been after him for years. We have a wonderful city manager and great city staff. So kudos to your staff who's worked so hard over the years, and kudos to you all who have supported this process to build, because again, you're the fish in the water. You can't hear it. Coming in from the outside, it's like, oh my gosh, this is amazing and it's wonderful. This is what's key, and this is where you're going, and all those opportunities, not just opportunities, requirements that you all engage in the budget process, and that the public is engaged in the budget process. That's key. That's what makes it all work. We've heard this, right? Have you guys heard that in your training?
A few times.
Yeah. And my question is, well, how? And in most cities, the budget strategic plan probably don't even reside on the same bookshelf, let alone connected, right? And what PBB does is it takes the budget and translates it into the programs that create your city, which is fascinating. And will help you meet the goals that you outline, the direction you give to your staff. You have a way to hold them accountable, and it gives you a whole nother set of questions. So your key priorities, right? And Rick's going to talk about how you got these, the definitions, what these mean. This wasn't just something pulled out of a hat. I mean, you can use AI to help with this, right? But what it does is it changes the conversations that you have. Okay? From these questions, right, the ones that I didn't know how to ask, to new strategic questions that you can ask and get the answers to. and have important conversations, right? How do we know what's most important to our community? Does it matter who you talk to? How do we reflect all those voices, even those who don't typically have a seat at the table or are typically heard from? What should we be doing? What exactly do we do? How much does it cost? How well are we doing it? How do we know we're successful? I think so many cities start with, well, we spend this money, we put it in these places, and we hope it's doing a good job. And the way local government works, it is pretty invisible till something goes wrong. And then everybody comes out. And then council's put in the spot of ombudsman, crisis managers, that kind of thing. What resources do we have to be able to do this? And this is key. The basic premise of priority-based budgeting asks the questions, how much do we have available to spend? That's why you guys started with revenues. This is where we get our money, right? This is how it's used. These are restricted funds. We can only use these things. And that, then we figure out how we spend those dollars to meet the priorities. Almost every other city starts with the question, well, how much do we need? Well, it's not like you can pull it out of the hat. You can't like generate more, right? So it's a backwards question. Are we in a good place? Well, what exactly does that look like? The fund balance discussion is huge. So many places are just teetering in and out of having any kind of fund balance at all. They're using their fund balance to cover ongoing expenses. Haven't made the connection. And Heidi was talking about, the grants and all those kinds of things. Cities, their elected officials will go off and say, hey, I found a grant. We can get a grant for this big flower program. We can get a grant for this. Let's just get more grants and bring it in. Some of you have been around for a while. What's the problem with grants?
One time.
Go away. And think about how many communities have been shocked by the COP grants. Because you get a COP grant for the federal government, how many years does that pay for one? I think it's 3 years. What happens at the end of that 3 years? If you haven't found money to cover that ongoing expense, because the COP grant was a one-time, that means you got to cut it unless you found new revenue sources, right? Those kind of conversations are not ones that we typically have. What programs are the highest priority and which are lesser importance? How do we do that? Are there other things we can look at? Maybe it's how many people does this program serve? Does this program bring in revenue? Is this program mandated either by the state, the feds? Maybe we impose this mandate on ourselves. Well, what actually is mandated? Are we going above and beyond? Does that mandate actually serve our priorities and our community? Or is it something we have to do because we have to do it? Let's see. What do we do because nobody else will do it? I know some communities are getting into childcare because it's not there. And there's a group of people who argue, well, government shouldn't be doing what the private sector should do. Correct. But if the private sector can't or won't, and it's a critical need for the people in our community, maybe we decide to do that, for example. Are there programs that might lend themselves to public-private partnerships? I've seen so many of the PBB communities really start to leverage that. There's an example in Colorado where I think the county was doing it, and they had some big conversations with the other two largest employers in the county. The jail, there's a prison, the hospital. They found out that the prison was shipping their laundry 200 miles to get it done because they didn't have a laundry facility. Didn't know that. So they had this conversation analyzed by the city, found out the hospital has a huge laundry facility that had excess capacity. County hospital, taxpayer-run prison, 3 entities. Remember, it's all the same. The dollars are coming from all the same people. So by the hospital figuring out that they could do the prison laundry, how much did they save taxpayers in terms of transportation, other fees? And they're actually utilizing the capacity that's already there. So looking for these partnerships, and I know you guys do a lot of those partnerships with nonprofits, other agencies. When the private sector is doing what we do, maybe we should consider getting out of that business, right? Boulder, and I know Boulder, Colorado is very different, but they, in this process, one of the things they found that they were subsidizing yoga lessons at the rec center. And it was something they started doing probably back in the 60s. And they never asked the question, why are we still doing this? Well, in the 60s, there wasn't a yoga studio on every corner. Right? So as they began to look at how things changed, they were so lowballing their yoga that they decided, look, and the people coming could afford to go to the other places. We're going to eliminate our yoga program. We think our after-school program for our kids is a better reallocation of those dollars. But so often, how do you tell in a line item budget? That would never suggest those questions. What are we spending to achieve our results? What's our plan? What could cause it to change? That amazing plan rolled out this morning, right? Your recession plan. I don't see very many cities with a recession plan. What might our future look like? If things change, can we anticipate, plan, and respond? You have a plan for that. You have a process ready to have the conversations. And it's not just staff making the decisions, right? They include in there, this is where council gets involved. You can do this little piece because you trust them, you understand the budget, but man, here, sure do the priorities. And then there are opportunities, right? That what if we suddenly decide to be the llama capital of the world because we think there's great opportunity here. Little side story, this tiny little city of Glendale, Colorado. It's 1 square mile. They have 2 single-family homes. 2. The rest are all apartments. It's totally surrounded by Denver. Okay. They were known for a certain entertainment spot called Shotgun Willie's. One of the largest strip bars in the West, right? They wanted to change their focus. Anybody into rugby? Glendale is the rugby capital of the West right now. They built a rugby stadium. They decided we want to not be known for Shotgun Willie's. They host international rugby tournaments. They have hotels, Airbnbs, but they could ask this question, well, what if they had a hard time, I don't know where they found the money, but from PBB, you could shift those. Well, what if we've got this issue that we really need to respond to. We've got a problem we need to deal with. We've got an opportunity we could take advantage of. And you have a methodology and a way to gather that data to really look at how you're spending your dollars and make some of those decisions. Let's have the conversations we want to have about the things that are really important to us, not those $237 line items, right? And I know the newly electeds here for a reason. You know, you heard things on the campaign trail. Those of you who are reelected, those of you who've been here, your people tell you all the time what's important to them. And if they ask, well, how much are we actually spending keeping this community safe? You could look at your line item budget. Well, we spend this much on the police department. But a safe community is so much more than that, right? It's about lighting. It's about trails. It's about our streets. It's about feeling safe. You've got almost every city department involved in public safety. And yet, PBB, you could pull up, I'm guessing Rick, right? Hopefully, hope I'm not throwing you under the bus. You could ask that question. We could show you, this is what we spend. All these programs, these are in the top quartile. So we're actually putting our dollars toward the things that are most important to us. So congratulations. The key points of PBB is really this focus on community priorities, the alignment with your goals, and the transparency and accountability. And so as you through where you've been and what this actually looks like, and how you can use this tool, I hope you realize that you really are not like all the other fish in the sea. You're in a totally different place.
Any other, okay, so when I started my second term, I went to the Arizona League of Cities training again. And there was a budget, there was a session about budget. There was 1,000 people in the room and there was a lot of conversation. I raised my hand. I asked about priority-based budgeting and the lady said, we don't do that in Arizona. We're not going to talk about it. Nobody does that here. How many municipalities in Arizona are doing PBB?
I don't even know. I have worked with Goodyear. I think Goodyear.
Used to
They may have shifted. And I remember working with Goodyear because I was at the council. And when they began to implement it and came back with their program inventory, there was a councilwoman, I could still see the room. She was sitting like pretty much where you were. And the staff presented it. And she'd been on the council for a long time and had the reputation of being that micromanager, kind of a burr under a staff saddle. And she saw this, she goes, this is all I've ever wanted in my 20 years on council. I just wanted to know what the hell we do. That was it. And after that, they're like, it was like flipping a light switch. Wally was like the most amazing person in the world. You know, she finally had the information she wanted. So there are not many. And I think the reason why is because it takes a considerable lift from your staff that to change that line item budget to a program budget. And it's more than a budget tool. It really is a culture shift. And that kind of change is hard.
So maybe one.
Maybe
Yeah. I just want, so as the old guy in the room, I just want to reflect back on being proud of being part of that council back in 2018 that had the conversation, should we switch to PBB? And I think it was nearly unanimous, if it wasn't entirely unanimous, we should go ahead and make that shift. And I just want to give a shout out to Shane Dilley, who was the deputy city manager at the time. A lot of people worked on that, but he was the one he's the guy who sold me on it. And his presentation and the way he had us reflect about all of this was very similar to what you just did for us. Was just something I remember, and I think his legacy. You know, I'd gone through the other budget process at least once, maybe twice in terms of the number of meetings. And I remember it was pretty easy. I remember thinking, is this a different way to do it? Let's do it that, let's do that. So it's weird that it doesn't set in more. It's about that transition, the investment that's required to make that transition. It takes a couple of years.
Yes.
There's not always that longevity of thought and that continuity in councils to occur.
And figure how to say this delicately. Although this is a GFOA best practice and an ICMA best practice, I'm getting my International City County Management Association, Government Finance Officers Association. So it is identified as a best practice. There's been research on it. Personal opinion, so I think it's because the old way is the way that the staff was taught in school, and the control rests with staff in that process. And you all know the tension between the elected official and staff, right? There are a whole other presentation that we could talk about, but Jim Savara and John Nalbandian have talked about this critical relationship between elected officials and your senior staff is translated through your city administrator. They're the experts. They've gone to school, they have the education, they have the training, they blood, sweat, and tears. This job is their life. You all come in, all you need, all we need as elected officials is age, residency, and citizenship, right? And yet, who are the final decision makers? So that's why there's this tension often in local government, which again, kudos to this city because you've changed all that. That's why I say it's a real culture shift. There has to be trust and transparency. Your staff know how to do this job, no doubt better than you do. And they understand that's not their role. So their role is to support you all, give you the information you need to make the decisions that you were elected to make, right? I think that's a fundamental issue in so many of these cities. The staff doesn't want to give up the control. Like, oh, let's give them as little as possible. And then we never even bring up the budget. We'll do supplemental budget things, but let's just keep them out of that. And I've heard from so many elected officials that every time I ask a tough question, as I get slapped in the hand and I'm micromanaging. You know, like even your question about fund balance and when this, I've seen other cities react like, you need to know that. Well, because I was elected to know that. So that's why it's a culture shift. So the cities and there are a couple school districts and counties that do this, really have an entirely different culture that's much more responsive to the community, much more in partnership with their elected officials. So that's why you guys should be really proud of yourselves. It's amazing work that you've done and you couldn't do it. I mean, look at all these people here for a budget retreat. Every other city I hear is, oh, well, do we have to go? And maybe you told them they had to be here, but.
Free lunch.
Oh yeah, that's what, but most of them would rather, they want to spend as little time with the electeds as possible. And what I see in these kind of PBB cities is that it's a real partnership.
That's not true here.
And I'm sorry, I went way over.
No, that was really good.
PBB through a recession, kind of not counting COVID because that was so quick. Extra value in it?
Yes, and I can't, because there were those difficult times. The value of PBB is that you have those quartiles and you see, these are the programs that are highest priority to us, and here's how we're spending our money. These are ones that are not. What this does is it gives you, if we go back to that Lego picture, right? Oh, here it is. Other people's budgets are like this, right? And if you are facing fiscal challenges, because you have to start with that, how much do we have to spend, not how much do we need? And so when the spending goes down and all you've got is this to look at, how are you going to sort that out to decide where you make those strategic decisions of how to reallocate your resources to what's most important? Number one, those communities that don't use this don't know what's most important. They don't know how their money is spent. They don't know what programs actually cost. And so it looks like this. PBB looks like this. It's like, all right, now we have the tools so that when you get to that, you know, your recession plan, get to that stage 3, it's like, all right, we've got the tools now. we understand these priorities are, we don't meet as many priorities. So let's continue to invest in the ones where this investment is leveraged. It's having a big impact. And it's like using a scalpel. Everybody else uses a shotgun. Oh, we have to cut our budget 10%. Everybody gets 10% off. Well, you wouldn't do that in your home budget, right? If you lost 10% of your income, if you cut the Netflix and your dining out and your mortgage and your insurance equally by 10%, focus on the mortgage and cut the other stuff. That's how PBB House gives you the tools to do that.
Just have a clarification question. I mean, our PBB budget is still data driven, line item driven. So you made a comment to say, well, the other way, you wouldn't know how much a program cost. Yes, you do, because it's still, what am I missing? On priority-based budgeting is looking at what you just said. If we had to make cuts, we're looking at what's the most important to our community. We're making sure our funds are allocated to the things that are most important to our community. But that is then the driving philosophy to all the line items and all the data and stuff that we still need and we still live by, and we still can go to line items and we know what that program costs and stuff. So what did you mean by that?
So PBB, you still have the line item budgets. You have to have the line item budgets. PBB kind of translates it into program budgets. So for example, let's just take travel and training, professional development, okay? A lot of times that's lumped so that it's your police academy stuff, it's your fire academy, it's the council training, it's ICMA, it's IIMC, it's the clerk training, right? Anything, it could be your travel to, you know, chamber kinds of things. But each one of those functions contributes to different programs, okay? So what PBB does is say, all right, this program, it looks at, here's the personnel costs, right? So for this person to run the program, well, that's 5% of her job. So it's 5% of her salary plus her loaded benefits, because we often don't think about that in the cost of a program, plus the materials, plus any training, plus facilities, plus overhead. So that little after-school program is not just the salary of the person running it. There are all these other costs. But you could get rid of that program, but you're still going to have to keep heating the rec center, for example, right? So by allocating it that way, you can see that whole thing. And I think Rick's going to give you more information on how you actually see and can access that. So I'm going to turn it over.
Details, but I'd like to kind of talk about that as far as our organization. This team leadership, sections, divisions, the general ledger programs are different than what we see in priority-based budgeting. We ask people to identify, what are you doing? What are you providing to the community? And you write in all those programs into the software. You say, I do this, it's for this purpose. And then you set down those programs for your own division. Then people pull in their line item into the conversation, say, okay, well, how much of this line helps deliver these programs within? So you may have like a travel line, but this travel supports this, this, and this. And by going through each line, you still have a line item. We still have to do that. By going through all that, at the end, they allocate 100% of what their budget is. Generally, we talk about base budget, ongoing budget, to delivering program, not general ledger program, but program community. So that's how we break it down for our organization. The next component, and we weren't going to really talk about this too much, but we can definitely have another session about it, is the next step is to, you got your program, you got the cost of those programs. The scoring part is the next critical part. Council set those priorities. We worked with the community. We talked about the objectives, but each program scores against every single priority. So we're trying to measure it. Some may be strong, so forth, to get a cumulative score. Okay. The other components within the scoring we have basic program attributes. The basic program attributes are like, what's the demand? Is there a high demand? Are we using this service, or has it been decreasing over time? Is it mandated by federal, city ordinances, or just something we do? And those types of things we also want to measure against, because then you have the tool built to where you can now run, questions. Okay, tell me about my lowest mandated programs, and like, how much resources do we put on that?
Yeah, I've
That's
had,
what you really use in a recessionary period. You look at, okay, where do we need to realign or spend less on?
I was with one group who had the discussion, there was a certain federal mandate and it cost them a ton of money, mandate. Ask the question, what's the consequence if we don't do it? And the fine was like $5,000. She made the decision to not comply with the mandate because they couldn't afford it at that point in time. And to pay the fine rather than like, $150,000 a year to do it. But they had the information to figure that out.
Just because a mandate is a low priority against all the community priorities, we still have to provide those services. We'll still maybe allocate a service. Doesn't mean we won't hit those low items, but it's just that conversation about where you're putting those dollars each year. But that's how you kind of break it from a line up to a program, cost, and so forth.
So then it's not that shotgun, but slash 10%. Let's be strategic. We can look at this program, this program, this program, and this program to get to that 10% and still make sure that we're meeting as many of those high priority programs that we're doing.
I think it's one of the reasons they kind of built this program is for those recessionary periods. And they put in all these questions that you have to answer and score against so you can have this information. Fortunately, we've been doing well. We haven't had to break out to that level. We are more about have some resources. Let's align them. Let's see what we deliver in our community. That's what we kind of give you a break out those new resources that we get. Get to a difficult time, yeah, we could pull out this tool and talk about those programs. It's not that hard to run out of this PBB program we have.
Thank you.
The Rick Show.
And I'm going to be brief. I'm not really going to go into details about how the program works, just kind of talking high picture stuff for our organization. It was very difficult for accounting, finance to move to this realm. Like Kathy said, we love numbers. We tie things out, things balanced. But the challenge to go to priority-based budgeting was very hard. But Shane's leadership, Heidi and I have been on this admin team since the beginning. We were able to really bring it forward and grow the program over the last 6 years to where we are today. But it does take effort, and I think we took up the challenge. It takes support from leadership. This is where we're going. It takes support from council. Like, yes, we want to see it this way. It wasn't done in a vacuum as we went forward. I thought I could talk through getting the slides up there. All right. So just high levels. We use this for the data-driven decisions, how are we spending our resources, how do they align versus that line item. I remember the books, and she showed the picture of the books that we bring to conversations. I remember those books, putting those together, color coding and binders. Oh my gosh, this is so much better than those days. As transparency engagement to the process, we're able to report out how we're delivering services, how we're in the quartiles and meeting those priorities within our organization. It aligns with those community priorities in a way that every service that we provide, whether it's administrative or out in the community, is scored and tracked as a program. Every program gets evaluated against projects like I talked about. We score, we move things across. And we determine the council community goals that help us align what we're doing. in this process. That's why we do this. This is what we're trying to get to. This journey did begin in 2019 is when we did the programming. We brought this council, we signed a contract and said, let's do this. We engaged the council that initial year. We talked about what's the council's priorities. We knew eventually we would expand more than that, but we started with the council, had those conversations, set the objectives that deliver those priorities in that work session opportunity that we had. A year later, summer later, we did that community outreach. We wanted to confirm with the community, give them a say. Here's what council talked about, hitting the goals that you think in the community. That was a very tough year. That's the COVID summer. But we tried different ways to reach out to the community. We did videos, we did surveys and that kind of stuff. We were pretty close. We did some massaging and came up with another official set of objectives with that. 2023, we continue to review the priorities objectives. We talked to council and we look to do this maybe every off election year, have this conversation. Do we want to look at the priorities, realign these? Because you don't want to be just stuck in time. We're always going to use forever. You need to be fluid and flexible to current community needs. And now this spring, we're going to come back to you to talk about what we think as a council now. Has our community changed? What's our objectives that we want to see? So I handed out a handout with the priorities. The community priorities are meant to stand the test of time. These are pillars that we believe our community should have year after year after year. We set these have not changed much even after conversation. We really set with these since the beginning of priority-based budgeting. The objectives are what tell you what are we trying to achieve within each priority. And this is a spot where you do see some adjustments and movements from each community outreach or change in council. And this is where we spend our time adjusting this. And then we go back and rescore against, okay, what's today mean? How are we scoring against today's objectives for our organization? And then lastly, with the update we did last year, we got a lot of feedback. So like, well, what does this mean? You have this word. And the PBB admin team did a great job trying to identify those that the community were asking, what council was asking, and set a definitions slide with our priorities and objectives for the city of Flagstaff. So that's just a brief overview of where we are. And then I was going to hand over John about the process we do.
Ask a quick question. Yep. What's the relationship between the priority community priorities, community input, and regional plan conversations?
The first time we set these and had a community conversation, we did try to tie those. We did not do that with this one. Probably we need to go back and do that. Because some of those things do drive into these priorities.
I know that process is active right now, so.
Yeah. I don't think we drive them. They would drive and filter into how their regional plan fits in with priorities. We wouldn't drive them necessarily. That's how I see it. But we probably have to do that process again and align those with what we're talking about.
Members, leadership. John Comer, Assistant Budget Manager. I'm going to talk briefly a little bit more about PBB, specifically here in the city, about our annual process, about PBB quartile, which you've probably heard of before, and hopefully show you a bit of the PBB public site. I think Rick has stolen most of my thunder on this slide.
Yeah, he does that.
Kathy stole mine, so I stole.
Thunder stealing. But just a couple notes. You can see here, we have the biannual process of reviewing program inventory. We ask divisions to go over all their programs, decide if there still should be programs, if there's any new ones that they need to be adding. And you'll see that we have two different kinds. We have governance, which is inward facing. Citizens are typically other city staff. And then we have the much more popular community programs that are outward facing, where their customer is your citizens. And so, yeah, it is fairly time intensive to do the program inventory. So we ask divisions to do them every year unless they have something new that they want. Step 2 is allocating the costs. And this is where we were talking about where we're really translating our general ledger accounts into the programs that they belong to. So we're asking divisions to allocate costs into their PBB programs. The third step is scoring the programs. And obviously they're scoring these against the council priorities that were created by you with public input and the objectives as well. And because those are constantly changing, like Rick said, we do ask divisions to score those every other year as well, or if any programs have been created. And also in scoring, we use a 2-step process there. First, divisions score their own programs, and then those scores are shown to a peer review group who also scores them, and they come up with the final score for the programs. Step 4 is submit and present budget requests. This is the opportunity for divisions to ask for either ongoing or one-time increases to their budget. And as somebody said today, the deadline is today, so do this. And fifth is analyze budget requests based on cost and program scores. I think one thing I want to stress here is that PBB is one tool that we use to make budget decisions. One tool that we recommend budget decisions for. Others can be emergent needs that come out within the priorities, or fund balances. Several other things could come into play. So really, it is a tool that we have, but the scoring is not secret. So recognize that. I want to talk quickly about quartiles. You've probably heard this term before. PBB uses quartiles in their scoring. The programs that are most aligned to community priorities are in the quartile, and then it goes down to the least aligned. So what we're seeing here is, this is from last budget cycle, and we're seeing the total amount of approved budget requests and how they break out by quartile. So what we see here is out of $28 million of requests, you can see about 6.6 is in the most aligned category, which is about 23%, and more aligned is about 40% at 11 million, and moving on down. So not surprisingly, we can see that the top 2 quartiles do take up a fair amount of those approved requests. That's not terribly surprising, but it's really not that drastic. We can still see here that 37% are in the 2 bottom quartiles. So I think that just kind of reinforces the fact that PBB is a tool, but it is not our only tool when we requests.
John, could you just elaborate a little bit on the least aligned? Because I know for new council members, just looking at first blush, it may seem like, well, why are we spending money on something that's least aligned?
Sure. Well, these scores here are cumulative, so they are dealing with all 6 of our community priorities. So there are certain programs that might score very low in certain areas, and that will probably drag down their cumulative score. But probably still very worthwhile in other priorities, in which case they're still very worthwhile programs, but their cumulative score might not reach that second quartile.
I mean, I think an example is probably the clerk's office. We have mandated things that are mandated in the clerk's office, but if you look at the scoring, they're less or least aligned with our priorities. So it's just an example. Sorry, not to use you as an example.
I'm a great example. I'm happy.
Thank you.
You are quartile 4.
Yeah, I am a quartile 4.
Any other questions on quartiles?
Assigning these values or assigning costs, these 4 quartiles, is that a committee decision or? Besides,
Don't believe we've gone that far yet, but it is a committee decision. Yeah, so all the scores that divisions start with, they do get peer reviewed. So it is a group decision on where those dollars land as far as budget decisions, that city manager recommendation, and then a board decision. It's a decision, sorry. 16 years of the counties. Any other questions? Okay, I think as Kathy noted, one of the most powerful parts of PBB is the transparency that it has with citizens. Towards that end, we have been using the PBB public facing site website. It is, I'll try to show it to you in a second, but it is a very mile-high overview of our budget. It does not get into, does not talk about specific accounts or anything like that. It really stays at the program level. So citizens can go in and there are different ways that they can search for data. If they're looking for a specific program name, if they're looking for the budget sizes, find all that information there. Recognize that it is not tied directly to our financial system. So all our information, line items, vendors, et cetera, based on programs. And also at this point, expenditures. Expenditures are usually one-time in nature, and they're usually very large, so they tend to skew the data pretty significantly. Maybe in the future we can add it somehow, but at this point we're not there yet. So let me see if I can share my screen. Okay. Okay, so this is the PBB, our PBB public site. And I think one of the most important things to note on here is usually when you open it the first time, I'm going to take you through a tour, and that tour is actually really good. I would recommend it. I don't have it up right now, but it does exist right here in this I button up in the top right. Couple slides, but it will start showing you all the interesting things that it has. But I'll be your tour guide today. Okay, so the first and obvious thing you probably see is the nice color-coded community priorities. Right down the center, you can see the single events one on the left, and then the 6 community one. Totals tab there for all priorities. You actually click on one of them. You can see the objectives that we've created underneath them, also color-coded. And also, if you look under all priorities, I think it gives a brief description of what the quartiles would probably entail. So at least quartile would be a program contributes to some degree towards achieving at least one of our goals. Highest quartile, the program shows highest degree of contribution to all of our goals. Okay, so let's go down and let's see some data. Okay, right now you can see it's defaulting to our current fiscal year, but if you want to, go back and check out some historical data. Stay on the summary tab for now, but basically what we're looking at here is of the total city operating budget, how much is budgeted in programs with a certain score. So let's take Safe and Healthy Community as an example. The darker shading means it is more aligned with our community priority. So let's say I'm going to extrapolate here, looks like maybe $140 million is our total operating budget there. If I hover over that darkest shade, we can see that 89 million of it, which looks like a pretty fair amount, maybe 3/4, is scored a 4, is the highest score as far as PBB is concerned. And then we can see a lesser amount, 27 million, is in that third quartile. Okay, now, sorry, I have to show this because I'm a data wonk, and if anyone else out there is a data wonk, see it because it's really cool. If you go to tree plot, and right now I am actually on sustainable and innovative infrastructure, but if you go to tree plot, citizens can now see every city program, the shading again represents, I think it says it up here, alignment to that community priority, with the darkest being the most aligned. And then if they want to see a certain program, they can do that. We'll do water meter maintenance. We can see that obviously it's most aligned. It's a darker shade. We can see the total cost of the program, see how many FTEs it has. We can see the personnel and non-personnel breakout of that total cost. We can see program revenue that it brings in. And then for anyone who really needs the data, the true data wonks, you can actually go to a table and download the table and take that data with you somewhere.
Size of the blocks on the tree plot is the amount of revenue.
Thank you.
Or not revenue, amount of budget appropriations to those based on sizes of those blocks.
Okay. Questions before I leave this public site?
I have a question. So since you came from the county, as a finance expert, how would you describe public access to this kind of data, as well as decision-making within the city? I mean, how would you compare the different systems?
County versus city? Well, the county certainly doesn't have anything like this. They certainly are transparent. I mean,
maybe let me ask, so you looking at this system, and I guess if you don't like this system, then the conversation might go in a different direction. But what are some of your initial thoughts about how the public can access data using this system versus any other system? Not necessarily the county, but just what struck you about this when you started at the city?
The potential that exists here. I felt that PBB is, we've seen with the way we work with them, that it's still a work in progress. They are listening to our concerns. They're still building something. And I'm kind of very new to the public site, and I'm really enjoying it. The fact that folks can see certain programs, but they're not getting into the weeds. They're not getting down to how much does this FTE get paid, et cetera. So I think it's about right sizing that transparency. And to me, I think PBB is hitting it really well.
Thank you.
Stop sharing.
Somewhat of a hypothetical. So you go through this budget process, and half department comes up and says, I got to cut some funds. And they come up with a number to cut the funds. How does that impact, or how does this impact that the availability or that fund getting cut? And what's the process? Does it go to the budget team? Does it go to council? How's that work?
Good question. That's why I'm glad that Rick Tatter is.
Well, this is a budgeting process. If you change things throughout the year, it doesn't change this matrix. This is stagnant based on what was adopted, how we assign those resources. So this won't change. We don't go back and say, let's move these monies and so forth. We don't reduce our budget on the financial statement. Operational decision that our divisions make. How do we operate, how we run our programs? So this is not necessarily connected to those types of decisions. Sure, but I would ask that division if they looked to say, this service, is this one of your high priorities? I don't know if you want a specific example, but yeah, they can drill in here and say, well, we want to get out of reclaimed plant maintenance. We want to reduce this, but you see this as a blue, as a very dark number. they're able to go see how their programs are aligned, absolutely. And they can say, well, this is one of my low quartiles, absolutely. They have this tool to back it up if they'd like to. How they present it is usually up to that division.
Okay, I'll stop sharing. Handing it back over to the city manager's office.
This last piece is where we really start to bring this together. We're going to share a little bit about, as staff, as a budget team, as a leadership team, the priorities that we've identified that we're focusing on as we head into this next budget cycle. Joanne's going to cover those for you, and then we'll come back to have the discussion section of this part of the day.
All right, I'm back. I don't think I have another movie. Well, that's all I had to say, right? That was
good.
Well, so what I wanted to just kind of go through today, obviously we are starting, or we're in the thick of our 25-26 budget. One of the things that we did as a budget team is we do this every year where we communicate to our extended leadership team on the expectations for budget. And so one of the things I wanted to do today was kind of walk through that. We had a team that worked on the memo this year. We actually send a memo out to our departments. And this is probably the second year I've worked on it. This year we've had a kind of another team that worked on it, and Rebecca, as a new member to the budget team, was a part of that as well. But some of the things that we want to do is just kind of help the departments kind of frame their budget requests and kind of really look at some of the priorities that we see in the organization. So this year sorry, I brought my wrong glasses. My progressives for this. So the theme this year that we chose, last year we actually chose defining our legacy, and this year we chose building our capacity. When we had a kind of a facilitated discussion that Shannon and I facilitated with our team, it was pretty clear that some of the issues that were coming forward. Last year, we dealt with a lot of issues with staff retention and recruitment, and if current council recalls, we did a lot of things to address employee compensation and recruitment issues. I think last year, one of our big items, actually, I'm just going to move forward in these slides. One of the items that we talked about last year, and I know we talked a lot about it yesterday about delivering projects, was some of the concerns with, our engineering division, for example, that we were having a hard time recruiting project managers. And just an example, we did some market adjustments, and we feel like we are almost completely staffed in that area. So again, just thanks to council for your support at all of those requests last year. But moving forward into our budget, I mean, one of the other things that came up was just the issues of maintenance. And I think we heard about it yesterday. Vehicle maintenance, our fleet, our facilities, some of these big projects that we're delivering that, we haven't really thought about how we're going to, deal with the vegetation management, some of the things that are kind of on the horizon. One of the things that we are still focusing on this year is investing in our employees. I just realized that I can see that, the PowerPoint back there. So it's been like 2 days and I didn't realize that TV was there. Tells you anything. But we're going to continue to invest in our employees, continue our recruitment opportunities. I feel like we've made a lot of progress. And since I've been here in the organization, but since the last budget cycle, continuing to address our market competitive pay. predictable pay plan advancement, so continuing that with the pay plans that we have in place at the city. Continue our pay for performance and continue to compensate our employees with good and strong performance. And for the newer, and I think we'll go more into detail, but we do have a process in place where our employees do have a predictable increase in salary if they have good performance. And not a lot of organizations have that, and that is helping our efforts. Continuing to maintain our cost share coverage, so keeping our benefits and continuing to address our entry level next year. And looking. One of the things that we've asked departments to do is align their budget requests with priority-based budgeting, and I think we've probably talked quite a bit about priority-based budgeting, but you'll see that the requests that come in, departments do need to align those requests, even if they're not in the highest quartile or the lowest quartile. And then some of the other things, ensuring that our requests are aligned with our carbon neutrality plan. And I think last year we added our 10-year housing plan. Prioritizing infrastructure replacement and maintenance needs. As I mentioned, this is a theme that has come up that, you know, what we need to do with our infrastructure, not just technology, but our physical infrastructure as well. Continue focus on transitioning ongoing operating expenses. So last year we did quite a bit of work with, you know, one-time items that we transitioned to ongoing, and we're hoping to continue to do that this year. Working to align the capital improvement plan within the constraints of our expenditure limitation. We've got a significant amount of here, and I think we'll see a lot. Paul's leaving the room as soon as I say that, but by Paul. He's done a lot of work on this. I appreciate it. And then ensuring our ongoing maintenance needs are identified and funded appropriately. So making sure we can going maintenance. So now I think what I'm going to do is turn it over to Shannon and Greg to kind of talk about expectations for the 25-26 budget and council. You can ask if there are any questions.
Is the county in this last election cycle, the county asked for a waiver or an exemption from that expenditure limit. The city, I realize the city's an exemption, or we can expenditure limit, but are we facing bumping up against that expenditure limit as we go forward?
I am going, Councilmember Stones, I'm going to have Brandy address that question. It's an excellent question.
Yeah, so we actually did go back to the voters in August of 2020 to increase our expenditure limitation. So we are in a good spot, but we do see some areas where we need to realign some of our capital projects and some of those purchases to make sure that they're matching with what we are actually seeing, and realigning that budget a little bit to ensure we stay under that expenditure limitation. But we watch that very closely at this time. Our actuals come in significantly below our expenditure limitation. So it's just a balance of what's actually happening versus budget, making sure we've got that CIP plan kind of matching with what we can deliver and what we can expend in any one year.
Just for informational purposes, can you just expand just for a few minutes what the expenditure limit means? Like, what does it do if we are against it?
Yes. So our expenditure limitation is something that is in state statute that limits local government how much money of their local money they can spend. So there's a lot, it's a pretty complex calculation. And there's a lot of exceptions to the expenditure limitation, but the state provides us that number. It grows every year based on population and consumer price index. So it grows every year for those inflationary costs as well as our population grows. That number grows. We get to exclude things like things that are funded with bonds, things that are funded with grants, and many other exclusions that allow us to spend more than that. But that is our cap. We cannot spend $1 more than that. If we do, there is a fine, and it's significant. They will withhold our state withholdings or state shared revenues. So it is pretty significant impact. I believe it's $1 for dollar. So we monitor that very closely and watch it closely. So does that help? I think.
Yeah, I know what it was. I just thought it would be good information for the record.
As we mentioned, we've shared a lot of information about the PPP process, our fiscal health. We just talked about, we've identified as some highlights that we need to focus on from a staff perspective. So this part of the conversation, we really wanted to hear from our council members to understand what you've been thinking about next year's budget process. What's been on your mind? Kathy alluded to many things earlier. What's important to our community? What is it that we're interested in accomplishing? This is a good time to understand what those thoughts are. And then our next retreat, we're going to come and we're going to talk about revenues, and we'll be able to start building based on the ideas that you've shared. What does that look like? We'll be able to see how the needs have aligned, how we're able to start talking about those funding.
Ready?
Ready? All right. You want to kick us off?
So one thing in terms of expectations, maybe this is a little sideways, but this is directed at you, Councilmember Spence and Councilmember Garcia. I would like to see you guys participate as fully as anyone else in this process. Don't feel like you need to sit back, be a wallflower and just watch. When you have priorities, and those should be equally weighted with the other priorities of council members in the room. So use your voice, speak up, make sure that you got a check mark next to things. Please don't just be passive and quiet. So a couple things. I'll start with the smaller one. There's this document going around from the Downtown Business Alliance describing some monetary requests for transformation of the downtown area. Just in general, I'm all in favor of that. I realize there's only so many dollars in the budget, and it's kind of a big ask for something new. It's making a splash for sure. But I would like to see a way for us to honestly and faithfully juggle how to implement that Downtown Business Alliance plan. If you want to speak to that
Briefly, but
right
I
away.
don't want to derail you.
I'm not done, but go ahead.
Yeah. I sit on their board. We have had internal meetings on this a few times of late, and we've had Hunter Hebert with Downtown Business Alliance. He's their new director. He's been at the table as well. Without getting into the weeds on it, there are increments as to how far into this new program we can go. And what we're talking about, the transformation that's being referenced, is one where a very goes to a lot of our downtown services. Right now, it spans many divisions, public works, pros, so on and so forth. And see a lot of that work outsourced, if you will, to a vendor yet to be determined. That vendor would likely work under the auspices of the Downtown Business Alliance, under their umbrella, rather than under the city umbrella. So it's an outsourcing, and one that to some extent makes a lot of sense. That's where the discussion is occurring internally. So I think it's in a stay tuned category. More information is coming to you, but I'm so glad that you referenced it, and I'm glad to hear your support for it. But there's a lot of discussion happening on that. Thank you.
I'm sure it would come up otherwise if I didn't mention it. So another thing I want to talk about, of course, is fire. We need to make sure that we are showing the community that we're prioritizing our fire resources. our fire resources within town, the fire resources we're going to need as we grow, the missing personnel that we currently have in the department, and our wildfire resources. Making sure that we're continuing to be fire wise and we're thinning our forests and we're encouraging people within town to do those fire wise practices and thin things out in that regard. Very supportive of the conversation around how do we make those expenditures more robust and supportive of those goals and objectives. What I would also say is that I don't find it helpful or useful or strategic to, in the same breath, make a recommendation and a prescription that that money we do that with comes from carbon neutrality efforts. I think we need to recognize that according to priority-based budgeting, sustainable and innovative infrastructure, environmental stewardship, and livable community are very high priorities that are just they exist. They're a reality we need to deal with in the way we budget things. And we have recently had a robust, ongoing, long-term community conversation with how we think about our carbon neutrality efforts and our fire safety and community safety efforts. And I would just like to remind everyone that I think there's a misunderstanding when we try to look at those two things from a zero-sum game. Our carbon neutrality efforts aren't necessarily about reducing the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. It's a mitigation strategy. It's a document and a program all to itself that is about how do we as a city and an institution change behaviors in a way that makes it so that we're putting less carbon out into the atmosphere and we are sequestering as much carbon as we can through our practices and our behavior and the little decisions we can make in the city. And that is completely independent of our objectives around just, lowering the temperature on the planet. We have lots of institutions throughout the state, throughout the country, throughout the world that are declaring carbon neutrality aspirations in different timelines through different ranges. And they're not saying that we need to, Microsoft, for example, is pumping a bunch of money through its carbon neutrality efforts into increasing fire departments and wildland fire efforts and forest health. It's recognized that these are different strategies. They come from different pots, different ideas mentally. And it's just not, it's a non-starter for me when we talk about forest health and we immediately pivot to pivoting against that money needs to come out of carbon neutrality efforts.
Yeah.
And Councilmember Matthews, I know you're probably feeling called out a little bit there. I don't mean to do that. I know that this is a larger conversation and that there is a big community out there that's talking about this. And my comments are directed at you. They're directed generally at the notion that it's more helpful to think about forest health on its own terms. And it just doesn't call to me when that conversation immediately is coupled with a conversation around turning carbon neutrality into the punching bag of that.
Thank you. My perspective. Yeah. Real fast, and again, not to belabor or go into unnecessary details. Fire. There's been some misinformation in the community. We've seen some queries and comments come into the mayor and council email, and I've seen some of the references made, and they're grossly inadequate. The vacancy within the department, the lack, the statement that the budget has been flat. Those things couldn't be further from the truth. This goes to yesterday's discussion. I we talked at length about the importance of staff's role, to not advocate, but rather to make sure council has accurate information and relevant information. We need to do that here. We're currently working on responding to some of the misinformation out there just to make sure that council with the community an accurate snapshot of where we are with our firefighting resources in the wildland fire specifically. To your second comment about it not being a zero-sum game, and we understand that. And I know there might be perspectives out there that we need to take from one pot and put more into another pot. And it goes to the importance of priority-based budgeting. That's going to be a tool that assists us here. But I just want to start the conversation by noting there's been some misinformation. There typically is in just about every topic, right? We can't control, by and large, what gets disseminated out there. We react to it and try to set the record straight, but it's challenging at times.
I think it's important to recognize that those criticisms are coming from a place of good faith. There's a genuine, authentic concern out there that is perfectly reasonable.
Oh, yeah. And in the aftermath of Los Angeles is totally understandable. People are quite concerned and rightfully so. Yes, please.
So for me, housing, I remember when I first came on council, and we passed the bond for housing, and then, I met with Sarah and her team, and reality, it's going to take us, a year or two to get staffing and stuff because we didn't ask for it in the budget. And I'm overgeneralizing, but I want to make sure that we are, in the budget team is understanding that we have declared a housing crisis. And I want to make sure that our housing department has the resources to execute what the voters called for, which is $20 million to be, invested in our community to help with our housing crisis. And it took up until less than a year ago for us just to even get housing as a benchmark on our agenda to see how that agenda item advances, the housing plan and the housing crisis. And those type of things, squeaky wheel is what gets answered. And to have it take an act of Congress just to have the housing rating on our agenda to remind us all that everything that we do, how is that helping us advance our need for more housing? I think it's really too slow. And I think that we need to make sure that we are putting a big emphasis on housing, because regardless of what people may support politically or personally or whatever, everybody needs housing at every different level. So I want to make sure that's on there. Fire resources and wildland fires, absolutely. And I think to Council Member Austin's point, maybe a philosophical difference. I've talked, every time I have my one-on-ones with sustainability, fire health and mitigation is already in the carbon neutrality plan. I think talks last year was about making it a more urgent priority, not to take money from the budget. It's just expanding because up until late, they had more resources. You don't write a budget, you don't write a grant for fire hydrants if the grant pool is only for waterfalls. And so it wouldn't be taking grant money that could be put towards other habits. It's just opening up to say, oh, I can write this grant that just came up for these particular activities, which we wouldn't necessarily have before. But that's just a philosophical difference. I read many years ago, and it came up again, that California, Northern California fires put their carbon emissions mitigation efforts, set them back 18 years. And I asked Nicole if she has a guesstimate on what the LA fires have set back, the most progressive state in our union, on their carbon neutrality goals, and, you know, it's gonna be astronomical. So I think that it does deserve a conversation at the table. We can do a whole lot of things, and then if we go up in smoke, what do we do? But anyway, that's just, again, I think just a difference of opinion. It needs to be a priority wherever it sets. The downtown district and that proposal, you know, it's part of our tourism. We saw the numbers yesterday about how many tourists come in through Flagstaff. It is our main economy and resources, and did not put special attention that that area already self-taxes themselves as a special district, because they understand that that's where everybody goes to. You know, whether they're staying at Little America or wherever, they end up downtown, and absolutely we need to make sure that you know, I drive around and see all our beautification stuff that we've done and the artwork on different boxes and stuff. And we did that because we want to be appealing to visitors and residents' eyes. And I think that giving special attention to downtown is definitely necessary. So housing, fire, and then the downtown proposal, I think, is my three.
For me, I'm a new council member, so some of this may come out differently for me now than it will when I start to learn more about the priority budgeting process. But an advocate of both Councilmember Matthews and also Councilmember Aslan's fire department and downtown proposals. One of my priorities is infrastructure improvements and deferred maintenance, but the more I understand about the way that they're funded, I'm not exactly sure how that priority is going to fit into our priority-based budgeting, how much control we have over it, and maybe not now, but during the budgeting process, helping me understand how we can get either caught up on that or things like that will help me out.
Maintenance, I heard you say, and
Deferred maintenance and infrastructure improvements, and I'm thinking mainly public works when I think about that.
can I add, not to put words in your mouth, you mentioned infrastructure, which is a big part of it. I know facilities could be
Yes.
considered infrastructure, but that is certainly another.
I think that's kind of where my head was actually going to. I just referred it to it as.
No, it's all, I think it's both. Coming your way, and I'm glad to hear you reference it. It's very important to us, so thank you for stating that.
So I've spoken to you about this many times, but there's a great program that's already been working with fire in terms of mental health. And I know that something's coming forward for both fire and police. And I consider this a public safety. I consider it kind of a baseline to keeping our staff healthy and happy. And along with that, salaries, always, you know, investing in our staff and making sure that we're competitive and that staff is happy. Core services, making sure that we have the equipment that we need, we have the staff that we need, that we are investing in making sure that we are able to deliver the services that our residents have come to expect. And as has been stated, climate includes fire. And so I don't see those as contradictory. I see them as complementary. And it kind of goes without saying that fire is being able to help our residents to become more fire wise in their own neighborhoods, as well as the forest thinning and making sure that we're fully staffed and equipped is absolute top priority. Housing, yes. I'd like to see as much emphasis on housing as we can muster. And the DBA, I'm fully in support of that as well. And even if it starts out at a smaller level, and we're simply shifting what we're already spending on the downtown area into what they want to do, and we figure out how to ramp that up, or whether you can figure out how to make that investment now, I would be supportive of that as well.
Thank you, Mayor. And I'm going to maybe plant a seed here only because I've heard you and other council members reference this before. And I want to make sure we're not losing sight of it if it remains a priority, but a lot of discussion about early childhood education. Kathy Novak made a reference of this in one of her examples, but I know this council has had very recent discussion about that. I'm trying to suggest it's one of your interests, but if it remains a topic of interest, I think this would be a good time to identify it.
Childcare and early childhood education. So any support that we can give for efforts that are already out there. And in terms of, I see this as, I mean, it's a community health issue, but it's also an economic development issue. Same as I see housing as an economic development issue. We can't have a healthy economy if people who live here can't be in the workforce due to lack of housing, lack of childcare.
Thank you for letting me insert that into the discussion. The other thing, and we'll move on to Vice Mayor. Yes, please.
Sorry, when it comes to the city funding and education, there are some parameters we have to make sure we're in as well.
No doubt. Yeah. Our support largely thus far has been through United Way as a distributor to various nonprofit programs. But that's a discussion yet to occur on the salaries and being competitive. And again, not to belabor, I do want to also go comments made earlier about how thankful we are for the progress that has been made last year, the year before, and the year before that, as we have rolled out our compensation plan from a few years ago and have gotten to this market-based, very competitive wage and the pay for performance that's been referenced. There's been a lot of progress. I don't want to lose sight of what we have done. I want to thank council for what has been accomplished, knowing that we have a long ways to go. But I think it's important to note there's been good progress. So thank you, Vice Mayor.
So thank you. And I see you're doing check marks. You can check me on all of those. I did want to, they were on my list, but I do want to touch on the downtown. I've been revisiting the downtown vision plan, and there's a lot of big things coming our way, and I think looking at how we financially support that is top on my list. And the one thing I wanted to add, and it's maybe not something we list here, but just good communication. I've had to come to city leadership with a couple of tricky questions, and I just want to make sure that when I do that, it's not that I'm micromanaging. It's just either I have more of an in-depth question because now this is my second term on council, or my constituents are asking me maybe a deeper level because they know I've been on council and I should have these answers. So I just want to make sure that you all know that. And if I'm ever crossing the line or it's like, no, Miranda, maybe just explain why so that I can have a better understanding.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Are you going vertical on this? Just you're on space?
That one kind of applies to every. It's related, but it's not necessarily maybe something we need to fund.
I just wanted to understand your admiring your amazing handwriting. Is excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, Dr. Spence.
I'd like to, as a new council member, just been impressed with everybody's effort on housing, affordable housing, availability of housing, climate impacts of housing infrastructure. And one thing I'd like to throw into the mix is the aspirational goal of having city-owned land be used to solve our housing emergency. And background for me on this is with the extension of J.W. Powell Boulevard major opening of a lot of land for housing development in the next 10 to 20 years. Much of that is zoned for single family residences. We would, as a city, be prohibited or preempted from doing higher density in much of the land that's opened up by extending J.W. Powell, except if the city owns property on which housing development is scheduled to take place, the city can set these standards. The city can, for incentives, the city can write the rules for housing development on city-owned land without the threat of the Arizona legislature preempting us. So my request for the budget process would be to look at land that the city could buy in the area that's being opened up. Be aggressive with housing development on city-owned land. And I think there's a section, square mile, labeled number 20 that could be purchased. And that's just, I'm not an expert on this, but if we could keep our eyes open, take maybe some of the bond money from the $20 million bond and put it into investing in land that could be city-owned and city-controlled high-density housing.
Thank you for your comments. I just, very quick, to give you some comfort in all of this. It's yet to be determined, but we know because we've been at the table with the landowners out there negotiating the right of way and the funding for the JWP arterial. The city will be seeing a mix of land use types coming in. So even though right now current zoning might be for large estate, stay tuned on that because there is going to be a bit more of a mix coming in. As to your other comment though about city-owned land and being able to do things on that, there is a parcel. It's not huge, but 29 acres, give or take, that adjoins JWP that is owned by the city and is intended to be used for affordable housing. Sarah Dart and her team and many folks in TD and elsewhere have been scratching their heads and brainstorming as to what can come of that. There's been early renderings of possibilities, and we're excited about it. Is going to check that box at least to some extent. I think you're raising other possibilities, but I also wanted to let you know there's already one parcel in play for affordable housing.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. And I believe, do we? Oh yes.
Can you go back a slide? Maybe it's 2 slides.
Yeah, I can. And then after your comment, Vice or Council Member Aslan, we need to get to Council Member House, who's online.
Yeah. So anyway, it was the slide where you talked about salaries and.
Is it not this slide?
Yeah. So I just wanted to take a beat to make sure that it's understood that I'm fully supportive of all of these goals.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for your comments. And
Shannon, you can check mark salaries and competitiveness. Another check mark there for me.
I think everything else comes from this situation being as healthy as we can make it.
Couldn't agree more. In yesterday's little exercise about identifying priorities, you know, we were at our tables doing individual brainstorming as to what the priorities we individually would see. You know, I shared mine, which was having a very strong organization. I think it underlies all that we do is having the organizational strength to do it. And underlying that is the need to be competitive and recruit and attract the very best candidates. So thank you for your comments, and we concur with that. Councilmember House, if you're able and online here, we'd love to hear from you. And if you need to write stuff down in the chat column, we can do that as well. not, we can always circle back to her.
I'll put a little note in the chat.
While we're waiting on that, any other follow-up or comments? This is, by the way, a very important part of the agenda today. We always like to allocate time for council to do a little brainstorming and share with us what your priorities are. It's important for us going forward to know standing out in your mind, what are things you would really like to see us give some attention to?
Since we were on the housing topic, and I guess I just missed this topic coming up at council in the past couple of years, but it seems there's another parcel of land that may or may not still be on the table, and that's the sunflower field out there.
There's several.
I just asked Sarah how much, we forgot how many parcels we ready.
I just wanted to throw that into the equation into the hat with Mr. Spence.
Yep. Very good.
Greg, do you know that? How many acres or parcels do we have already?
I don't have the aggregate number. Sarah Dar would be the right source on that. Yep. Hey, Sarah, isn't that amazing? You just popped up over my shoulder. Good to see you.
Just magically appear. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council leadership. I do not have that off the top of my head. I can spend a few minutes digging for it, but I wanted to clarify your question, Councilmember Matthews. Are you speaking of how many acres does the city own? The city own? Because that's a very different number than the acreage or number of parcels that have been identified for use of housing.
The second. And my
The second
question
one.
on the, yeah, and my question on the chat was, I didn't know if it was made more sense to say we have 7 areas, parcels, or 30 acres, because 30 acres may be a bunch of quarter acres or not. So I didn't know how to present it, whichever made sense. But I know we did that tour and it took half a day to look at all the city-owned property, vacant, that are available for housing.
Thank you. And I can pull those. It's not a number I store off the top of my head. The Schultz Pass property is about 7 acres. The John Wesley Powell property, the city manager referenced a minute ago, is about 27 acres. We have about a 3-acre parcel at the corner of Fanning and Lockett. And then we have some smaller pieces over in the Lone Tree area. And we have Lone Tree. One of our pieces that we've talked about historically over on Isabel actually is, thank you, council, for approving a lease for long-term lease, 99 years, for Housing Solutions to create additional 11 units of family housing there. I think our greatest opportunity for increasing the number of housing units on city land is the redevelopment of our public housing properties, which, important to note, will not permanently displace any resident currently living within public housing. Everyone has a right to return. And we'll be bringing forward in the next few months, I'm going to say a few months, and I'm going to go out a little bit longer before council break, what strategy for bringing forward those parcels for development will look like. We're already working on it.
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks for being so attentive there. Much appreciated. Other comments, questions? I know we're nearing the end, but we have a very good list. This is not exhaustive. It's not the last time you'll have an opportunity to weigh in on this. As we noted, this is a bit of the start of this process involving council engagement. So if things come to mind a little bit later on, it's the point of no return. You feel like we've covered enough ground today? Heads are nodding. We are going to feed you lunch. I believe it's here. I want to, we'll turn it back to you, Mayor, to wrap up just like you did yesterday, and however you choose to do that. But I want to take the opportunity to thank everybody for a very engaging discussion this morning. A nice overview of priority-based budgeting, some very good precursor type of presentations from our finance team. that will set the stage for the next discussion and the discussion that will follow that. Much appreciated. Thank you for your time over the last day and a half. We've had I think a very good series of presentations. We've been quite fortunate to have yesterday's facilitation team here, and very fortunate to have Kathy Novak come all the way over from Colorado. Yes. A safe journey back, and thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and enlightening us in so many ways on priority-based budgeting. Joanne, good luck with your half marathon, and thank you all very much. Have a great weekend. Mayor, I'm turning it back to you.
Thank you. Do we have any public participation?
I haven't had a request.
All right, then we are adjourned.
I thought I saw Steve raise his hand real fast. Steve, did you have a public comment? Mayor, can I interject that, or are we done?
Sure.
Was that me? Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. So I want to try and tie in yesterday's facilitator, Fred. He talked a lot about data and what you're going to see with the budget for the next retreat. And one of the things that I've been talking about for a couple of years here is, what do we think we're going to grow at? We had the hospital suggesting we're going to grow 2.7 to 2050. We had the water department think we're going to grow 1.4 out to 2070. We had a consultant that came in November of 23 that told you in court that Flagstaff could probably grow at 0.7 and to 2040 and then start shrinking. Fred yesterday took a look at his numbers and his forecast. He was suggesting that the compounded growth is going to be below 0.4% for the next 20 to 30 years out to 2050. Okay. So my point in your job, you got a tough call, but in everything you do, particularly the capital projects, pick one number. I don't care what it is. I'm not here telling you which number it is. But I have informed you about the declining birth numbers in this country, where the Census Bureau, which has great demographers, in 1 year missed their forecast for births by 17 years of their forecast. Okay, it's difficult. It's not easy. But you got these capital projects. I found when I looked at it this past summer, it's impacted 500 million in projects. That's not a small number. We don't have a ton of extra money floating around here. And a couple of years ago, it was produced about 1.2 billion in projects that could be funded, that aren't funded. So I urge you to, as you work forward through the budget process, you work forward with the staff, come up with one number. Come up with one number. What are we going to grow at? And you've got to plant your flag somewhere.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you for that.
All right, we're adjourned.